When I said I do, I kept one massive secret from my new husband. I never told Julian about the $78 million trust my late father, a four-star Army general, left solely in my name. Thank God I kept my mouth shut. Because exactly 72 hours after we returned from our tropical honeymoon, my new mother-in-law kicked my front door open with a sleazy lawyer in tow, demanding I sign away my home and my business to her son. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who thought they could walk all over you. My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and I run a tech and historical data archiving company. I preserve African American history, a passion instilled in me by my father. He taught me the value of our roots and protecting what belongs to you. He always said real power is quiet. But to my mother-in-law Beatrice, my life's work was a joke. Beatrice prided herself on projecting Black excellence. She wore designer suits, drove luxury cars she leased, but pretended to own and look down on anyone who did not fit her elitist standards. From the day Julian introduced us, she made it clear my modest lifestyle was a stain on her family brand. It was a rainy Tuesday morning. My suitcases were sitting half unpacked in the hallway. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee, wearing an old college shirt, feeling the peaceful glow of a newlywed. Then the heavy oak front door flew open, hitting the drywall with a loud crack. Beatrice marched in without knocking, her designer heels clicking aggressively against my floors. Behind her scurried a nervous man in a cheap gray suit, clutching a scuffed briefcase. I set my coffee mug down, my heart jumping into my throat. Beatrice, what is going on? How did you get a key to this house? She did not answer. Instead, she swept her gaze across my living room, sneering at my vintage furniture and the historical archives I was digitizing for a client. She stepped to the island and slammed a stack of legal documents onto the counter. Sign it, she commanded, her voice sharp and echoing loudly. I stared at the packet, reading post-nuptial agreement and asset transfer. What is this? I asked, keeping my voice steady, despite trembling hands. The man stepped forward, avoiding eye contact. I am Mr. Davis, representing your husband's family interests. This document formally transfers the deed of this property, along with a controlling stake in your archiving business, directly to Julian. I let out a short laugh. Transfer the business I built, working 18-hour days. Transfer the house I bought before I met your son. You must be out of your mind. Beatrice slammed her hand on the counter. Do not use that tone with me, Maya. You should be thanking us for letting you marry into this prestigious family. We gave you the wedding of the century. We elevated your pathetic social standing. Now it is time to pay up. I felt my blood pressure rising. The wedding of the century. You mean the $300,000 country club circus that I explicitly said I did not want? The one you forced Julian to book because you had to show off to your rich friends. I told you from day one I wanted a small ceremony, and denied Julian the high-profile wedding he deserved just because you lack class. Beatrice sneered. Listen carefully, little girl. You owe us for those massive wedding debts. And let us be honest. A woman who dusts old books for a living brings absolutely no value to our family brand. Your blue-collar hobby is an embarrassment. Julian needs real assets to leverage for his consulting firm. This house and your commercial lease are the only things of value you possess. I am not signing anything, I said, crossing my arms. My business preserves our history. It is highly profitable, it is mine, and neither of you are touching it. Get out of my house before I call the police. Beatrice let out a freezing cold laugh. Your house, oh sweetie, you are standing on my ground now. We have already initiated a legal lien against this property for the wedding debts you caused. You sign this document right now, or we will tie you up in expensive litigation until that little book club you call a business goes bankrupt. My chest tightened. I reached for my phone, ready to dial my estate lawyer Eleanor, when the front door opened again. It was Julian. He looked perfectly put together in his custom navy suit, carrying his expensive briefcase. A wave of relief washed over me. Julian, I called out. Thank God you are here. Your mother and this lawyer just broke into our house. They are trying to force me to sign a post-nuptial agreement to give you my business and the deed to the house. Tell her to leave right now. I waited for him to wrap his strong arms around me. I waited for the man who had stood at the altar exactly 72 hours ago and promised to protect me, to throw his toxic mother out the door. Instead, Julian casually set his briefcase down on the armchair. He did not look angry. He did not look surprised. He just looked incredibly tired and annoyed. He walked past me, stood shoulder to shoulder with his mother, and picked up the heavy gold pen the lawyer had placed on the counter. He held it out toward me, his handsome face completely devoid of any emotion. "It is just business, Maya," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Just sign the papers. You do not know how to manage money." I stared at the heavy gold pen in Julian's hand, feeling the chill of his words seep into my bones. "You do not know how to manage money anyway." The man who had vowed to honor and cherish me just 3 days ago was standing shoulder to shoulder with the mother who despised me, treating my livelihood like a clearance sale. I did not scream. I did not cry. My father had trained me better than that. When facing a domestic enemy, you do not show fear. You hold your ground. I pushed the pen back across the marble counter, letting it clatter against the fake lawyer's briefcase. "I am not signing anything," I told Julian, my voice deadly calm. "This house is in my name. The business is in my name. You have contributed absolutely nothing to either of them." Before Julian could formulate a lie to defend himself, the front door swung open again. It was not enough that Beatrice had invaded my sanctuary. Now Chloe was here. Chloe was married to Julian's younger brother, Marcus. She was a woman who navigated the world with the blind, weaponized confidence of someone who had never been told no. She strutted into my living room carrying 2 large cardboard moving boxes, completely ignoring the tension in the air. "Oh, good, you are all here," Chloe announced, dropping the heavy boxes right onto my newly restored vintage rug. "Maya, be a doll and start moving your archiving equipment down to the basement. Marcus and I are going to need the master suite cleared out by Friday." I looked from the boxes to Chloe, then to Julian. "Are you out of your mind?" I asked. "Why are you bringing moving boxes into my home?" Chloe let out a loud, theatrical sigh, brushing her blonde hair over her shoulder. She looked at Beatrice for validation before turning her condescending gaze back to me. "Julian promised us the master bedroom, Maya. Honestly, you should be thanking us for stepping in. It is just safer if people who actually understand property values manage the estate. You have all these old, dusty books and historical junk cluttering up a prime piece of real estate. We are going to modernize it. Give it some actual class." She was talking about my life's work. The historical records of African American families. The legacy I preserved with my own 2 hands. To her, it was just clutter ruining her aesthetic. "You are not moving into my master suite, and you are certainly not managing my estate," I said, taking a step toward her. "Get your boxes off my rug and get out." Chloe ignored me completely. She wandered over to the kitchen island, running her fingers over the counter until her eyes locked onto a small velvet box I had left out earlier that morning. Inside that box was my father's vintage gold pocket watch, an engraved military heirloom he had carried through multiple deployments. Before I could stop her, Chloe reached in and picked it up, dangling it by its delicate gold chain. "Wow, this is actually kind of heavy," Chloe remarked, squinting at the military insignia etched into the back. "We could probably pawn this and get decent money to put toward the kitchen renovations. I know a guy who buys this kind of urban vintage stuff." My vision went red. That watch represented a 4-star general's lifetime of service, blood, and sacrifice. And this woman was talking about pawning it for a kitchen backsplash. "Put that down," I ordered, my voice dropping an octave. Chloe smirked, holding it just out of my reach. "Oh, relax, Maya. You are acting so aggressive right now. It is just an old watch. You people always get so attached to things you cannot afford to keep." I did not hesitate. I reached out and firmly snatched the gold chain from her fingers, pulling the watch safely into my palm. I did not push her. I did not strike her. I simply retrieved what belonged to me. The reaction was instantaneous. Chloe stumbled backward, clutching her wrist as if I had snapped the bone. She let out a piercing, hysterical gasp, tears instantly pooling in her eyes. "Oh my God," she shrieked, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical precision. "She attacked me! Julian, she just attacked me!" Beatrice gasped, covering her mouth in exaggerated horror. Julian lunged forward, placing himself between me and Chloe, treating me like I was a dangerous predator. "Are you crazy? Julian screamed, his face twisted in rage. What is wrong with you, Maya? She is pregnant. You cannot just violently attack a pregnant woman over a piece of junk. I stood there, clutching my father's watch, watching the performance unfold. The white tears had been deployed, and my own husband was using them to villainize me. Chloe sobbed into Julian's shoulder, peeking at me with a victorious smirk hidden beneath her fake distress. You need to sign the papers, Julian demanded, pointing a finger in my face. You are out of control. My mother is right. You are a liability. If you do not sign, I am calling the police and pressing charges for what you just did to Chloe. I realized right then that I was standing in a room full of enemies. There was no reasoning with them. They had orchestrated this entire morning to break me down, humiliate me, and legally rob me blind. I needed to get out of this house to regroup and contact my lawyer. Fine, I said quietly, turning my back on them. I walked over to the coat rack, grabbing my purse and my car keys. You want to play these games? Go ahead, but I am leaving. I pulled out my phone as I walked toward the door, opening my banking app to book a room at a hotel downtown. I needed a safe place to plan my next move. But as the app loaded, a bright red notification flashed across the screen. My available balance read 0. I refreshed the app, still 0. The business operating account, the one I used to pay my employees and maintain my archiving facility, was completely locked. The personal savings account I shared with Julian was drained. I stopped dead in my tracks, my thumb hovering over the screen. Julian let out a low, cruel chuckle from his kitchen. He walked up behind me, leaning close to my ear so only I could hear him. Did you really think you could just walk away? He whispered. I froze the accounts this morning, every single one of them. You do not have a dime to your name, and your little business is effectively dead unless I authorize the release of those funds. You have no money, no hotel, and nowhere to go. Now go back to the kitchen and sign the contract. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, the zero balance mocking me. My business accounts, my payroll, my personal savings all wiped clean or frozen solid. I slowly turned to face Julian. He stood there with a satisfied smirk, the kind of look a predator gives a trapped animal. Beatrice and Chloe were watching from the kitchen, sipping my expensive sparkling water as if they were enjoying a matinee performance. You froze the payroll account for my archiving business, I said, keeping my tone deadly flat. I have 10 employees, Julian. 10 hardworking black men and women who rely on those paychecks to feed their families, and you froze their money just to force my hand. Julian adjusted his suit jacket, completely unbothered. They will get paid the minute you sign the post-nuptial agreement, he replied smoothly. I simply called the bank this morning and reported suspicious activity on our joint accounts. As your husband, I have a legal right to protect our marital assets. It is a temporary freeze, Maya. A necessary precaution until we establish proper financial boundaries. Proper financial boundaries meant stripping me of every dollar I had earned, so I would have no choice but to surrender my property to his mother. I looked at Beatrice, who raised her glass in a silent, mocking toast. I looked at Chloe, who was already measuring my living room, with her eyes mentally replacing my historical artifacts with her generic catalog furniture. They thought they had me. They thought stripping away my access to liquid cash would break me down into a submissive, desperate woman. They forgot who raised me. I did not say another word. I turned on my heel and walked straight past Julian, heading down the hall toward the master bedroom. I pulled a small duffel bag from the closet and began throwing in a few changes of clothes, some basic toiletries, and my laptop. Julian leaned against the doorframe, watching me pack with a condescending shake of his head. Where exactly are you going to go, Maya? He taunted, crossing his arms over his chest. Your credit cards are declined. Your savings are locked. You cannot even afford a cheap motel off the highway right now. Are you going to go sleep in your car? Just be reasonable. Come back out to the kitchen, sign the paperwork, and we can all move forward as a family. I zipped the duffel bag shut. Then I stopped. If I took the bag, I would look like a woman running away. I would look displaced, panicked, and defeated. I looked down at my father's vintage gold watch, still clutched safely in my hand. My father did not run. He strategized. I dropped the duffel bag onto the floor. I slipped the gold watch into my blazer pocket, grabbed my purse, and walked right past Julian without a single glance. Leaving your clothes behind. Julian mocked as I marched down the hallway. Smart choice. You will be back by dinner when you get hungry. I walked into the living room, bypassing Chloe and Beatrice. Chloe let out a loud, obnoxious laugh. Good luck out there, Maya, she called out. Try not to attack anyone else on your way out. I pulled the front door open, stepping out into the crisp morning air, and let the heavy oak door slam shut behind me. I climbed into my car, gripped the steering wheel, and took one long, steadying breath. I had no cash, no credit cards, and a husband actively trying to destroy my life. But I had something they knew nothing about. I had Eleanor. Eleanor Vance was a powerhouse attorney, a brilliant, no-nonsense African-American woman who had served as my father's most trusted legal counsel for over 2 decades. Her downtown law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass high-rise, a fortress of legal warfare. I drove straight there, ignoring the low fuel light blinking on my dashboard. The receptionist recognized me instantly and ushered me straight into Eleanor's corner office. Eleanor sat behind a massive mahogany desk, reviewing a stack of briefs. She wore a tailored crimson suit, her silver hair pulled back into a sharp bun. She looked up, taking in my rigid posture and the intense look in my eyes. "Hi, Matt, his move," I said, taking a seat across from her. Julian and Beatrice ambushed me this morning with a fake lawyer. They demanded I sign a post-nuptial agreement transferring the house and my archiving business to Julian. When I refused, I found out Julian had frozen all my bank accounts, even my business payroll. He brought his brother's wife Chloe to move into my master bedroom. Eleanor did not gasp. She did not express shock or sympathy. She simply closed the file she was reading, removed her reading glasses, and leaned back in her leather chair. A slow, calculating smile spread across her face. "I told your father you would not need the entire year to see Julian's true colors," Eleanor said, her voice rich and commanding. General Sterling always believed in testing a person's character under pressure. That is why he structured your inheritance the way he did. He knew Julian was overly interested in your modest archiving business and that charming Beacon Hill house. I pulled my father's gold watch from my pocket and set it gently on the desk. They tried to take the too, I told her. Chloe wanted to pawn it for a kitchen renovation. Eleanor's eyes flashed with a dangerous protective fire. She reached into her locked desk drawer and pulled out a thick black portfolio, setting it heavily between us. "Your father was a master tactician," Maya, Eleanor said, tapping the black folder. "He set up a specific contingency clause. The $78 million trust is entirely yours, fully accessible, the moment there is a verified threat to your financial safety or physical well-being. By freezing your business accounts and attempting to extort your property, Julian just triggered the release clause. The money is ready. You have $78 million fully liquid and protected by federal trust laws." A heavy wave of relief washed over my shoulders. I had the power to crush them. I could pay my employees, secure my business, and evict Julian, Beatrice, and Chloe by the end of the day. "Good," I said, leaning forward. "Let us initiate the eviction and file for divorce. I want them out of my house today." Eleanor held up a single manicured hand, stopping me in my tracks. "We will get to the eviction, Maya. But you need to see the rest of the board before you make your first move." She flipped the black folder open, bypassing the trust documents, and slid a thick background check report across the desk. It bore Julian's name stamped with a red confidential seal. "Your husband is not just a greedy mama's boy trying to steal your business," Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a serious warning tone. "Julian did not freeze your accounts just to punish you. He is desperate. Take a very close look at page 4, Maya. Look at exactly who your husband owes money to, and more importantly, look at who co-signed his debts." I pulled the thick confidential file closer, my eyes scanning the highlighted financial records. The glossy, flawless image Julian projected to the world, the high-end corporate consultant with the bespoke suits and the perfect smile, evaporated right there on the page. According to the private investigators Eleanor employed, Julian had not been consulting for the past 2 years. He had been recklessly gambling away everything. The ledgers showed a catastrophic downward spiral of underground sports betting, unregulated poker rooms, and offshore accounts. He did not owe a few $1,000s to a credit card company. Julian owed $2 million to a highly organized, completely illegal gambling syndicate operating out of Chicago. I felt the air rapidly leave my lungs as I turned to the next page. Beatrice was listed on a secondary contract, her signature binding her as the guarantor of his debt. She had used her fake nonprofit charity as collateral an organization that had exactly zero liquid assets but held a veneer of high society prestige. "They are entirely tapped out," Eleanor explained, her voice steady and clinical. "Beatrice has foolishly leveraged everything she owns to keep the collectors at bay, but her socialite lifestyle is a complete facade. They have no actual wealth left. The mob gave them a firm deadline. That is why Beatrice forced Julian to rush the wedding. That is why they ambushed you the minute you returned from your honeymoon. They need the deed to your Beacon Hill house and the commercial lease to your archiving business immediately. They intend to liquidate your entire life, sell off your historical artifacts for scrap in hand, the cash directly to a criminal syndicate to save their own skin." My hands shook not from fear, but from a blinding white-hot rage. Every microaggression Beatrice had ever thrown at me about my blue-collar job, every time Julian had belittled my business as a cute little hobby, it was all a projection of their own desperate poverty. They were financial parasites trying to drain my blood to survive. "And the frozen accounts?" I asked, tracing the line of debt on the page. "A panic move," Eleanor replied. "Julian knows he cannot legally force you to sign a postnuptial agreement. By freezing your operating capital, he assumes he can starve you out. He thinks you will sign the property over just to make payroll for your employees. It is classic financial abuse designed to break your spirit." I firmly closed the file, the heavy thud echoing loudly in the quiet office. I looked at Eleanor, feeling the power of my father's legacy backing me up. "Unlock the trust," I commanded. "I want my $78 million accessible today. I am going to bury them." Before Eleanor could respond, a loud commotion erupted in the reception area outside her heavy glass doors. We heard the receptionist raising her voice, demanding someone stop. The heavy mahogany door to Eleanor's office violently swung open, slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. Julian aggressively stormed in his chest, heaving heavily, his eyes darting frantically around the room until they locked onto me. He had his phone in one hand, the tracking app glowing brightly on the screen. He had followed my location the second I left our driveway. "What the hell are you doing here, Maya?" Julian barked, marching into the room as if he owned the entire building. "I told you to stay at the house and sign the papers. Instead, you run crying to this storefront lawyer." He cruelly sneered at Eleanor, looking her up and down with blatant disrespect. He had no idea who she was or the immense power she wielded. He just saw an older African-American woman in a suit and assumed she was beneath his corporate pedigree. "Get up," Julian ordered, pointing a sharp finger at me. "We are leaving right now. You are coming home to fulfill your duties as my wife. We have a family brand to protect, and you are out here throwing a tantrum over a little archiving business you do not even know how to run. You are embarrassing me, Maya. Stop acting like a child and do what you are told." I did not flinch. I did not stand up. I simply looked at Eleanor. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She did not lose her temper. She slowly stood up from her leather chair, resting her manicured hands flat on the mahogany desk. She radiated the kind of terrifying quiet authority that only comes from decades of destroying arrogant men in courtrooms. "You have exactly 60 seconds to remove yourself from my firm before I ruin your miserable life," Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a deadly echoing register. Julian scoffed, puffing out his chest to mask his sudden hesitation. "Excuse me, do you know who I am? I am a senior corporate consultant. I make more in a month than you see in a year. You cannot talk to me like that. I am speaking to my wife and she is coming with me." 45 seconds. Eleanor continued, completely ignoring his tantrum. "You are trespassing in a private legal facility. I have already pressed a silent alarm under this desk. Building security is on their way up, accompanied by off-duty police officers. When they arrive, I will have you arrested for criminal trespass and harassment." Julian took a step forward, trying to intimidate her with his physical presence. "You cannot do that to me." "I can, and I will," Eleanor countered, stepping around her desk. "And while you are sitting in a holding cell, Julian, perhaps I will make a quick phone call to Chicago. I hear the gentlemen running the underground sports books are very eager to know your current whereabouts. I wonder how they will feel when they learn you are harassing your wife instead of liquidating assets to pay back that $2 million debt you owe them. The blood instantly drained from Julian's face. His arrogant posture collapsed like a deflated balloon. He stared at Eleanor, his mouth opening and closing like a fish suffocating on dry land. He looked at me, sheer panic flashing in his eyes, realizing my lawyer knew his darkest, deadliest secret. 10 seconds, Eleanor whispered, her gaze piercing right through him. Julian swallowed hard. He took a stumbling step backward toward the door. He tried to muster one last shred of his fake dignity, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You have no money, Maya," he hissed, his voice shaking. "You cannot pay her legal fees. You cannot pay your staff. You will come crawling back to me by tonight. Get out," I said, my voice steady and cold. Julian turned and fled, nearly tripping over the doorframe as he scrambled into the hallway, desperate to escape the building before security arrived. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, plunging the office back into absolute silence. I looked at Eleanor. She calmly walked back to her chair, smoothed her crimson skirt, and sat down. She opened her laptop, her fingers flying gracefully across the keyboard. "Let him think you are broke for just a little longer," Eleanor said, a brilliant, dangerous smile lighting up her face. "It will make the trap so much sweeter when it snaps shut. Now let us authorize your first withdrawal from the General's trust. How does $10 million in liquid cash sound for a start?" "It sounds like the perfect beginning," I replied, watching the transfer confirmation flash across Eleanor's screen. With my financial arsenal fully loaded and securely hidden, I spent the next 48 hours playing my part to perfection. I ignored Julian's threatening text messages. I slept in a luxury hotel under an assumed name, but I made sure my phone remained turned off, so he would assume I was sleeping in my car or begging on a friend's couch. By the time Sunday morning arrived, I was ready to execute the next phase of Eleanor's brilliant strategy. I dressed carefully for Beatrice's exclusive Sunday brunch at the Oak Ridge Country Club. I chose a simple beige dress, skipped my usual makeup routine, and pulled my hair back into a severe, messy bun. When I looked in the mirror, I appeared exactly as they expected me to look. A broken, exhausted, penniless woman who had finally realized she had no other options left. The country club was a monument to old money and carefully curated exclusivity. Valets rushed to open doors for luxury vehicles, while members in pristine golf attire sipped mimosas on the manicured terrace. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors and easily spotted Beatrice holding court at a large table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was surrounded by her wealthy socialite friends, women who wore their privilege like armor. Julian sat beside her, nervously checking his phone, no doubt sweating over the deadline his mob creditors had given him. Chloe sat on his other side, laughing loudly and looking completely at home in a space funded entirely by Beatrice's fake charity and Julian's illegal debts. I kept my head slightly lowered as I approached the table. Julian spotted me first. A triumphant, greasy smile spread across his face as he leaned back in his chair. "Look who finally decided to come back to reality," Julian announced, making sure his voice carried loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "I told you she would not last 2 days out there without my money." Beatrice turned her head slowly, looking me up and down with utter disgust. Her friends stopped their conversations, watching me with thinly veiled amusement. "You look terrible, Maya," Beatrice remarked, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. "But I suppose reality is a harsh teacher for someone of your background. Have you had enough of your little rebellion? Are you ready to apologize and do what is necessary for this family?" I forced myself to look down at my hands, acting thoroughly defeated. "I just want this to be over," I said quietly. Chloe abruptly stood up from her chair, grabbing a full glass of red wine from the center of the table. She walked toward me with a wide, predatory grin. "Let us get you a drink," Chloe said in a sickly sweet voice. "You look like you need to calm those aggressive nerves of yours. We certainly do not want another violent outburst like the one you had in your living room." As she stepped directly in front of me, Chloe deliberately tripped over absolutely nothing. She thrust her hand forward, tossing the entire glass of dark red wine directly onto the front of my beige dress. The cold liquid soaked through this fabric, instantly staining it like a massive, humiliating badge of dishonor. Gasps erupted from the women at the table. Julian let out a loud groan of embarrassment, rubbing his temples, as if my ruined dress was a personal insult to his reputation. "Oh my goodness, I am so clumsy!" Chloe gasped, pressing a hand to her chest in a terrible display of fake shock. But as she leaned in close, pretending to dab at the stain with a cloth napkin, her voice dropped to a vicious whisper that only I could hear. "Do not worry," Chloe hissed, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "I brought something that suits you much better anyway. You people are so used to serving right. It is in your blood." She reached into a designer shopping bag resting on the empty chair beside her and pulled out a folded garment. She shook it out, revealing a black and white maid's uniform, complete with a cheap white apron. It belonged to the country club catering staff. She thrust it into my chest. "Go put this on before you ruin the upholstery on these expensive chairs," Chloe commanded loudly, making sure the entire table heard her. "It is what the help wears, but honestly it matches your blue-collar aesthetic perfectly." I stood dripping in red wine, holding the humiliating uniform. My father's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me that pride is for the weak, but strategy is for the victorious. I did not throw the uniform back in her face. I did not raise my voice. I simply gave her a blank stare, turned around, and walked to the country club restroom. I stripped off the ruined beige dress and put on the cheap maid's uniform. I tied the white apron around my waist, smoothing the fabric with steady hands. I looked like a servant, exactly what Beatrice and Chloe wanted me to be. When I walked back out onto the terrace wearing the catering uniform, Beatrice's friends openly laughed. Julian shook his head in mock pity. "Have we learned our place?" Beatrice asked coldly as I returned to the table. "Because I do not have time to play games with you anymore, Maya. Julian has business to conduct and we need your signature right now." She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the thick post-nuptial agreement, slapping it down on the table right next to a silver pen. "This document transfers the deed of your house to Julian. It also grants him full executive control of your archiving business and all its physical assets. Sign it, and we will allow you to go back to your dusty little books. Refuse, and I will make sure you never work in this city again." I looked at Julian. He was practically vibrating with desperate anticipation, his eyes glued to the pen. He needed this signature to pay off the Chicago syndicate. He needed my blood to save his own life. I picked up the silver pen. I did not hesitate. I flipped to the back page and pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line. But I did not sign my normal everyday signature. I used a highly specific, legally binding corporate proxy signature that Eleanor had meticulously taught me the day before. It included a tiny, almost imperceptible abbreviation next to my last name. By using that exact formatting, I was not just transferring the company to Julian. I was legally transferring every single active liability, every hidden penalty, and every ounce of corporate debt directly into his personal name. I signed the document and pushed it back across the table. Beatrice snatched the paperwork up immediately, inspecting the signature with greedy, triumphant eyes. She smiled at Julian, tapping the contract against the table. Finally, she said, her voice dripping with venom, "It is done. The property is ours." Julian let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me like I was trash he had just swept out the door. "You can leave now." Julian dismissed me with a wave of his hand. "Walk home for all I care. We have real business to handle." I turned around and walked away from the table, my maid's apron blowing slightly in the breeze. They were popping a fresh bottle of champagne behind me, celebrating their flawless victory. They were rejoicing over stealing my life's work, completely unaware that I had just handed Julian the keys to a sinking ship. They had no idea that my archiving building was carrying a pending $500,000 structural fine from the city, a fine that Julian was now personally and legally obligated to pay the moment he countersigned that paper. Monday morning arrived with the heavy scent of old paper and leather bindings filling my archiving facility. My company occupied a sprawling brick warehouse in a historic district. Inside, my team of 12 brilliant African-American historians and preservationists worked meticulously to restore census records, photographs, and civil rights documents. This was my sanctuary. It was a place built on the preservation of our culture and our truth. I arrived early, gathering my staff to explain exactly what was about to happen. I warned them to stay calm, let the intruders dig their own graves, and trust my strategy. Right at 9 O'clock the front glass doors swung open. Julian strutted in wearing a sharp charcoal suit, carrying himself like a conquering king. Chloe trailed closely behind him, clutching an oversized designer tote bag and sipping an iced latte. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors, radiating an obnoxious level of entitlement. They had not come to observe, they had come to conquer. Julian clapped his hands loudly, the sharp sound echoing off the high ceilings and causing several of my lead preservationists to look up from their delicate restoration work. "Listen up, everyone," Julian announced, projecting his voice across the main floor. "There has been a change in management. As of yesterday afternoon, I am the sole executive owner of this facility and all its assets. Things are going to look a lot different around here. We are implementing immediate corporate restructuring." Chloe stepped forward, lowering her sunglasses to the bridge of her nose. She eyed the immaculate preservation tables and sneered. "Honestly, this place smells like a damp basement," Chloe complained, waving her manicured hand in front of her face. "You," she barked, pointing a finger directly at Marcus, my senior archivist, who held a doctorate in African American history. "Grab some trash bags and start clearing off these tables. We need to make room for the contractors to measure the space. I am thinking open concept lofts." Marcus stood frozen, glancing at me. I gave him a subtle nod. "Excuse me," Marcus replied calmly. "These are original documents from the 1920s. They cannot be moved without proper climate-controlled cases." Chloe rolled her eyes and let out a harsh, patronizing sigh. "Listen, sweetheart," Chloe said, dripping with venomous privilege. "I do not care about your little arts and crafts projects. When the new owner tells you to clean up, you grab a broom and you clean. Do I need to speak slower for you to understand basic instructions?" My blood boiled. Watching this woman walk into a sanctuary of Black history and treat a highly educated Black man like an uneducated servant took every ounce of my restraint. Several other staff members bristled, dropping their tools. The racial microaggressions were suffocating. Julian did not intervene to correct her. Instead, he puffed out his chest, stepping up to Marcus with an intimidating glare. "You heard my sister-in-law," Julian threatened. "Do it or you are fired on the spot. I am not running a charity here." I stepped out from my glass-enclosed office, clutching a thick stack of manila folders against my chest. I forced my shoulders to slump, letting my face fall into an expression of absolute broken despair. I made my voice tremble just enough to sound completely defeated. "Please stop," I begged, walking slowly toward Julian. "Please, Julian, do not talk to my staff that way. They are just trying to do their jobs." Julian turned to me, a cruel smile stretching across his face. He loved seeing me like this. He loved the illusion that he had finally crushed my spirit. "Maya, you are still here," Julian mocked, checking his watch. "I thought you would be busy packing up your desk. Since you clearly lack the stomach for real business, Chloe is going to act as the interim site manager. She knows how to handle people who step out of line." Chloe smirked, taking another sip of her latte. "Do not worry, Maya. I will make sure your little workers learn some actual work ethic. Though I doubt these old papers will fetch much at auction. We are probably just going to gut the interior by Friday." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my performance flawless. I let a single tear slide down my cheek. I looked down at the floor, acting as though my entire world had collapsed. "Fine," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "You win, Julian. I cannot fight you and your mother anymore. If you are going to take the building, you need to sign the final lease transfer. The post-nuptial agreement gave you the company, but the physical building lease requires a direct assumption of liability signature." I brought the paperwork. I held out the manila folder. Julian snatched it from my hands with eager greed. He did not read the fine print. He did not question why a defeated woman was so readily handing over the final piece of the puzzle. His arrogance blinded him entirely. "See, Chloe," Julian boasted, pulling a sleek silver pen from his jacket pocket. "I told you she would fold. Women like Maya are too emotional for the corporate world. They crumble the second you apply real pressure." He flipped to the last page of the lease transfer document. He leaned over a preservation table right next to a stack of fragile historical photographs and aggressively signed his name on the dotted line. He pressed so hard the ink bled through the paper. Julian stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a victorious grin. He tossed the signed document back at my chest. "There," Julian declared. "It is officially mine. Pack your things, Maya. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate my property before I have security throw you out." I caught the folder. I looked down at his bold, sloppy signature. The bait had been taken. The trap was sprung. I stopped crying. I straightened my shoulders. The tremble in my voice vanished completely. "Actually, Julian," I said, my tone turning dangerously cold and sharp, "I think you are the one who is going to need an hour to pack." Julian frowned, confused by my sudden shift in demeanor. "What are you talking about? I am the legal owner of this building now." Before he could finish his sentence, a loud, heavy series of knocks pounded against the front glass doors. We all turned to look. Two burly men in bright yellow construction hard hats and neon city vests were standing outside. They carried thick clipboards and heavy-duty flashlights. I walked over and unlocked the door. The lead inspector marched inside, pulling a bright red citation notice from his clipboard. "I am looking for the current legal owner of this commercial property," the inspector announced, his booming voice halting all activity in the room. Julian puffed up his chest and stepped forward. "That would be me. Julian Vance. I just assumed total ownership of this facility today. How can I help you?" The inspector looked at Julian, completely unimpressed. He shoved the red citation directly into Julian's chest. "Mr. Vance, you are in violation of City Code 402. This building has critical foundational damage that was cited 6 months ago. Since you are the documented owner, who just assumed all active physical liabilities, you are hereby served with an immediate structural penalty fine." Julian looked down at the red paper, his confident smirk instantly melting into a mask of pure horror. He read the bold black numbers printed at the bottom of the page. "You owe the City of Boston $500,000, the inspector stated bluntly. "Payable in exactly 30 days, or we seize the property and file for your immediate arrest." Julian stood completely frozen in the center of the archiving floor. The bright red citation notice fluttered slightly in his trembling hand. He stared at the bold print demanding $500,000, his perfectly tailored charcoal suit suddenly looking like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. The lead city inspector crossed his arms, waiting for a response, while my lead archivist Marcus watched with a quiet, highly satisfied smile. Julian tried to stammer out a defense, his voice cracking as he claimed there was a huge mistake, insisting he had just signed the transfer papers mere seconds ago. The inspector bluntly informed him that corporate liability does not care about timelines. A signature is a binding signature, and Julian was now the sole owner responsible for the massive structural fines. I watched Julian rapidly unravel the arrogant corporate consultant, reduced to a panicked, sweating mess right in front of the very employees he had just threatened to fire. But my attention was suddenly pulled away from his spectacular downfall. While Julian was busy hyperventilating over a $500,000 penalty, Chloe had completely lost interest in the situation. To her, city inspectors and building codes were boring working-class inconveniences. She had wandered away from the main floor and slipped directly into my private glass-enclosed office. I had left the door slightly ajar when I stepped out to deliver my crying performance earlier. Worse, my personal wall safe, tucked discreetly behind a framed historical map of Boston, was standing wide open. I had unlocked it that morning to retrieve the building lease documents and had deliberately left the heavy steel door unlatched. I marched away from the chaotic scene with the city inspectors and stepped quietly into my office. Chloe was standing behind my desk, brazenly rummaging through the small velvet display shelves inside the steel safe. She carelessly tossed aside corporate ledgers and secure flash drives, treating my private property like a rummage sale until her greedy hands landed on a small, worn mahogany box. Before I could say a single word, Chloe flipped the mahogany box open. A gasp of pure, unfiltered greed escaped her lips. Resting on the dark velvet inside was a set of pristine antique South Sea pearl earrings. They were breathtaking, flawlessly round and glowing with a deep, iridescent luster. My father had purchased them decades ago during a military deployment, gifting them to my mother before passing them down to me. They were irreplaceable pieces of my family history. Chloe did not hesitate. She plucked the pearls from their resting place and held them up to the fluorescent light, her eyes wide with covetous hunger. She walked over to the mirror hanging on my wall, holding the oversized pearls up to her earlobes, turning her head side to side to admire her reflection. She looked completely mesmerized by my family legacy, admiring herself with stolen goods. "Put those back right now," I said, stepping fully into the office and pushing the glass door shut behind me. My voice was low, carrying a dangerous, commanding edge. Chloe jumped, startled by my sudden appearance. She quickly lowered her hands, but she did not drop the pearls back into the mahogany box. Instead, her fingers curled tightly around them, hiding them in her palm. She pasted on a defiant, sickly sweet smile. "Actually, Maya," Chloe said, lifting her chin with unwarranted arrogance. "Since Julian just took total ownership of this entire building and everything inside it, these are technically company assets now. And since I am the new interim manager of this facility, I think these would look much better on me. It is not like you have anywhere fancy to wear them anymore. You are just going to be sitting at home waiting for an allowance." I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. "Those pearls do not belong to this archiving company," I stated clearly, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "They are a personal family heirloom. Put them on the desk and walk out of my office before I make you put them down." Chloe's fake smile instantly vanished. She took a step back, her hip hitting the edge of my desk, and she immediately pulled her smartphone from her designer tote bag. She held the glowing screen up like a shield, her thumb hovering dramatically over the keypad. "Do not take another step toward me," Chloe warned, her voice suddenly trembling, practicing the exact fragile pitch of a terrified victim. "I will dial 911 right now, Maya. I will tell the police that an angry, aggressive black woman is cornering me in a locked office. I will tell them you threatened my life and my unborn child because you are bitter about losing your little business. Who do you think the police are going to believe, a successful, pregnant, innocent woman like me, or a hostile, unemployed woman like you?" The racial undertones were not even hidden anymore. She was openly weaponizing her privilege, fully prepared to use the police as a personal attack dog to steal my property and throw me in a jail cell. She stared at me, daring me to challenge a system she knew was designed to protect her tears. I stopped moving. I stared into her pale, vindictive eyes. I calculated the variables in a fraction of a second. A physical altercation would give Julian ammunition in the upcoming divorce. A police visit today would delay my immediate plans and potentially freeze the trust. I let my shoulders relax. I let out a soft, chilling laugh. "Keep them," I said, waving my hand dismissively toward the door. "Consider it an early baby gift." Chloe blinked clearly, disappointed that she did not get to play the screaming victim, but her greed quickly overrode her temporary confusion. She dropped the antique pearls into her designer bag, gave me a triumphant, mocking smirk, and marched out of the office to find Julian. The moment the glass door clicked shut behind her, I walked to my desk and picked up my phone. I did not call the police. I dialed a direct line to my attorney. Eleanor answered on the very first ring. She took the bait. I told my lawyer, watching through the glass as Chloe strutted across the archiving floor, completely oblivious to the massive fine Julian was still arguing about. She stole the South Sea pearls from the safe. Eleanor let out a dark, deeply satisfying chuckle over the secure line. "Excellent work, Maya," Eleanor replied, her voice practically purring with anticipation. "That foolish woman has absolutely no idea that those pearls are federally insured military assets. The original jeweler laser engraved microscopic serial numbers into the nacre of each individual pearl for your father. Chloe did not just steal some jewelry, she just committed grand larceny of a tracked, federally insured military heirloom, and we are going to let her wear them to her own execution." I hung up the phone and walked out of my office, leaving Julian and Chloe to their temporary toxic delusions of grandeur. I had a gala to attend. 3 days later, Beatrice hosted her annual philanthropic fundraiser at one of Boston's most exclusive downtown ballrooms. To the outside world, Beatrice Vance was a pillar of the community, a shining example of Black excellence who championed underserved youth through her nonprofit organization. In reality, her charity was a glorified shell company, an empty vessel she used to launder her social standing, and more importantly, a desperate vehicle to crowdsource the $2 million her son owed to a violent Chicago gambling syndicate. The ballroom was dripping in manufactured wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables draped in imported silk. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne, serving the city's elite politicians, corporate executives, and wealthy socialites. I walked through the grand double doors wearing a simple, unadorned black dress. I had barely taken 2 steps into the foyer before Beatrice intercepted me, her eyes flashing with a mix of triumph and absolute disdain. Maya Beatrice snapped, grabbing my elbow and pulling me away from the incoming guests. "What are you doing walking through the front entrance? You are not a guest tonight. You are broke. Julian legally owns your little paper dusting business, and my son is currently dealing with the massive financial mess you left him. Since you are living under our mercy now, you are going to pay your keep." She shoved a cheap, stiff black apron into my chest. Her perfectly manicured fingers dug into my arm as she leaned close, her expensive perfume masking the unmistakable scent of desperation. "You are working the coat check," Beatrice commanded, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper. "You are going to stand behind that counter, take the coats of people who actually matter, and keep your mouth shut. Maybe if you show some humility and actually work a real service job, Julian will let you move back into the guest room. Now put the apron on and get out of sight before you embarrass my family." I looked at the apron. I looked at Beatrice, whose neck was flushed with the high-stakes anxiety of a woman trying to save her son from the mob. I did not argue. I did not throw the apron back in her face. I simply tied the strings around my waist and walked over to the coat check counter, tucked in the shadowy corner of the grand foyer. I took my place behind the rack, playing the exact role of the defeated, submissive wife they so desperately needed me to be. From my vantage point, I had a perfect view of the entire ballroom. I watched Julian nervously pacing near the bar, downing his third glass of whiskey. He looked immaculate in his tuxedo, but his hands were shaking. He kept checking his phone, jumping at every shadow, knowing the syndicate was watching his every move. Then Chloe made her grand entrance. She sashayed into the foyer wearing a plunging emerald gown, hanging off the arm of Julian's brother Marcus. And right there, gleaming under the bright crystal lights, were my father's antique South Sea pearl earrings resting heavily against her pale neck. Chloe spotted me behind the coat check counter, and her face lit up with a vicious, predatory joy. She immediately altered her path, dragging Marcus over to my station. She slipped out of her expensive fur coat and carelessly tossed it across the counter, making sure it hit me directly in the chest. "Careful with that," Maya Chloe sneered, adjusting the stolen pearls so I could get a perfect view of them. "It is real fur. Not that you would know anything about luxury anymore. Honestly, this job suits you perfectly. You always did fade into the background. And do not worry about the master bedroom. We are already picking out new paint colors." I took her coat, hanging it up with smooth, practiced efficiency. "The pearls look stunning on you, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Enjoy wearing them tonight." Chloe let out a loud, obnoxious laugh, patting the stolen heirlooms. "Oh, I will. It is amazing what you can afford when you actually have business sense. Keep up the good work, coat girl." She strutted into this ballroom, utterly clueless that she was parading around a room full of federal judges and politicians wearing stolen, federally tracked military property. I watched her go, a cold, quiet satisfaction settling deep into my bones. The trap was fully set, and the prey was dancing right into the center of the cage. The hours ticked by. The wealthy guests dined on filet mignon and truffle risotto, oblivious to the financial decay rotting the foundation of their host's empire. Beatrice worked the room like a seasoned politician, smiling, laughing, and securing donations, desperately trying to scrape together enough cash to keep the Chicago syndicate from breaking her son's legs. Finally, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The ambient chatter faded as a spotlight hit the main stage. The master of ceremonies, a prominent local news anchor, stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his booming voice echoing across the silent room. "Tonight we have witnessed incredible generosity, but we are here to announce something truly historic, a contribution that will ensure the future of this foundation and its community outreach." Beatrice stood at the front table, smoothing her expensive gown. Julian stood right beside her, gripping the back of his chair. They were banking their entire lives on this very moment. "We learned today," The MC continued building the suspense that an anonymous donor is here tonight, representing the Four-Star Foundation. They are about to present a staggering check for $5 million. Hearing this, Beatrice smiled proudly, preparing to walk on stage for her victorious acceptance speech. The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. Beatrice smoothed the front of her custom emerald gown, her chest puffing out with absolute undeniable triumph. I watched from the dark shadows of the coat check counter as she leaned over and whispered something into Julian's ear. He closed his eyes, letting out a massive, shaky breath of pure relief. The suffocating weight of the Chicago gambling syndicate was finally lifting off his shoulders. They actually thought they had won. They truly believed this phantom donor was their golden ticket out of the massive, dangerous hole Julian had dug for himself. The master of ceremonies raised his hands, gesturing for the wealthy guests to quiet down. "Will the representative of the Four-Star Foundation please join us on the stage?" the MC announced. He stepped back from the wooden podium and extended his arm toward the grand, sweeping staircase. The ballroom fell into a hushed, expectant silence. A brilliant white spotlight began to sweep across the luxurious room, searching the crowd for a billionaire philanthropist. Heads turned. Excitable whispers rippled through the elite attendees. Beatrice stood at the edge of the stage, her perfectly practiced high society smile plastered across her face, waiting to embrace her wealthy savior. I reached behind my waist and untied the stiff strings of the cheap black apron Beatrice had forced upon me. I let the rough fabric slide off my shoulders and fall onto the floor behind the coat check counter. I smoothed down the front of my simple, unadorned black dress. It was not a designer gown, and I did not have a stylist, but I did not need imported silk or diamonds to command a room. I had the blood of a four-star general running through my veins. I stepped out from the shadows of the foyer and marched directly into the main ballroom. The spotlight operator, catching the sudden movement at the back of the hall, swung the blinding beam of light directly onto me. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Hundreds of wealthy politicians, powerful corporate executives, and elite socialites stared in sheer confusion as the woman who had just been handing them their expensive coats walked purposefully down the center aisle. Beatrice saw me first. Her practiced camera-ready smile instantly snapped. Her eyes widened in a visceral mixture of horror and fury. I could see her mouth moving frantically, hissing at a nearby security guard to remove me from the room, but the guard was just as confused by the spotlight as everyone else. Julian stared at me as if he were looking at a ghost. The color drained completely from his handsome face. The glass of expensive whiskey he had been clutching slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the polished hardwood floor. The sharp crash echoed loudly in the quiet room, but neither of us broke eye contact. Chloe, standing near the front VIP table, with the stolen antique pearls glowing around her pale neck, let out an audible scoff. She leaned over to Julian's brother, clearly thinking I had lost my mind and was about to make a public, humiliating fool of myself. She had no idea about the massive tidal wave that was about to hit them. I walked up the carpeted stairs to the main stage with slow, deliberate, powerful steps. The master of ceremonies looked wildly from me to Beatrice, completely unsure of protocol. I did not wait for a polite invitation. I stepped right up to the podium and firmly took the microphone from his hand. Beatrice lunged forward, her expensive heels clicking rapidly across the wooden stage. "Maya, what do you think you are doing?" Beatrice hissed under her breath, trying to physically block me from the microphone. "Get off this stage right now before I have you arrested for trespassing. You are ruining my charity event." I did not back down. I leaned forward, bringing my lips just inches from the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice booming loud and clear through the massive ballroom speakers. Beatrice froze. The sheer, unyielding authority in my voice pinned her to the spot. She took a staggering step backward, realizing she had absolutely no control over this situation. The crowd remained dead silent, completely captivated by the unfolding drama. "My name is Maya Sterling Vance," I announced, looking out over the sea of wealthy donors. "Many of you handed me your coats tonight, assuming I was nothing more than hired help. My mother-in-law, Beatrice Vance, certainly wanted me to believe that was my permanent place. But I am not here to check coats. I am here representing the anonymous donor you have all been eagerly waiting for. I am the sole director and primary beneficiary of the Four-Star Foundation." A collective echoing gasp ripped through the ballroom. Flashes from press cameras suddenly began firing, illuminating the room in rapid bursts of white light. Beatrice grabbed the edge of a nearby cocktail table just to keep from collapsing. Julian looked like he was going to vomit right there on the extravagant floral centerpiece. The foundation was established by my late father, General Arthur Sterling. I continued, my voice steady and commanding. My father was a man who dedicated his entire life to honor, integrity, and the genuine upliftment of the African American community. He built a financial legacy designed to support real charities organizations that do the hard boots on the ground, work to save lives and build futures. We evaluate every single grant application with the highest level of scrutiny because true philanthropy demands absolute, unquestionable transparency. I turned my head slowly, locking my gaze directly onto Beatrice, who was now trembling violently under the bright stage lights. 2 weeks ago, Beatrice Vance submitted an urgent expedited request for a $5 million grant to her nonprofit organization, I said, making sure every single syllable rang crystal clear across the silent room. She claimed this money would be used to build a state-of-the-art community center for underserved Black youth right here in Boston. She paraded her charity around this room tonight, taking your hard-earned money under the beautiful guise of Black excellence and community service. I gripped the edges of the wooden podium. The entire room was holding its collective breath. But my father taught me how to conduct thorough reconnaissance before entering any battlefield, I stated coldly. My legal team ran a full, uncompromising audit on this organization. There are no blueprints for a community center. There are no youth programs. Beatrice Vance operates a fraudulent shell corporation. Beatrice let out a strangled, breathless cry, shaking her head frantically at the audience. Julian was frozen in pure terror, realizing exactly what I was about to say next. Therefore, I announced, projecting my voice to the very back of the room, as the sole director of the 4-Star Foundation, I am publicly canceling the $5 million grant. We will not be transferring a single dime to this organization tonight or ever. Our financial audit revealed massive discrepancies, highly fraudulent activities, and direct undeniable ties to a $2 million illegal gambling debt held by her son, Julian Vance. The ballroom completely exploded. Reporters began shouting questions over the noise. Wealthy donors jumped out of their seats in outrage, demanding immediate answers about where their money had gone. Chloe shrieked, clutching her face in horror as the social elite turned their glaring eyes toward her table. Beatrice clutched her chest, her knees finally buckling as the pristine high society image she had spent decades building shattered into a million irreparable pieces. And I stood at the podium looking down at Julian, watching the terrifying, undeniable reality wash over his face. Julian did not stay frozen for long. The sheer magnitude of the money I had just announced snapped him out of his paralysis. Survival instinct mixed with blinding, desperate greed kicked in. He shoved past a server, knocking a silver tray of champagne flutes to the polished hardwood floor. The glass shattered into 100 pieces, but Julian did not even flinch. He charged toward the stage stairs, taking them two at a time, his expensive tuxedo jacket flapping wildly behind him. He stormed right up to the wooden podium, his face red and slick with sweat. He reached out with both hands, trying to physically pry my fingers off the microphone stand. "Turn it off," Julian hissed under his breath, his eyes wide and frantic like a cornered animal. "Maya, you are making a massive mistake. You are going to ruin us." I did not let go. I tightened my grip on the cold metal and looked him dead in the eye. "I am not going anywhere," I replied, my voice projecting clearly over the sound system for every single guest to hear. "We are having a transparent conversation about philanthropy, Julian. Do you have something to add?" Realizing he could not muscle me away from the podium without looking like a complete monster in front of the city elite, Julian pivoted. He turned his back to me, gripping the edges of the podium and leaning aggressively toward the audience. He forced a strained, artificial laugh, trying to play the part of the rational, amused husband handling a hysterical wife. "Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse my wife," Julian announced, his voice booming through the massive ballroom. "She is clearly unwell tonight and prone to emotional outbursts. The stress of managing her small business has clearly taken a toll on her mental health. But rest assured, any foundation she claims to represent any money she is talking about is strictly marital property. We are legally married. Under state law as her husband, I am the co-owner of her entire estate. Therefore, I will personally guarantee that the $5 million grant to my mother's charity will be processed and cleared by tomorrow morning. A low murmur rippled through the sea of wealthy donors. Down on the main floor, Beatrice suddenly stood a little taller. The color returned to her cheeks. She pressed a hand to her chest, letting out a sharp gasp of relief. In her twisted mind, she thought Julian had just saved them. She thought the marriage certificate was a golden ticket that gave him unrestricted access to my father's military trust. I could see Chloe nodding along from her table, touching the stolen pearls, assuming the natural order of her privileged world was being restored. I stood right behind Julian, watching his shoulders heave as he tried to catch his breath. He actually believed his own lie. He genuinely thought he could just bulldoze his way into my inheritance, using his status as a man and a husband. I stepped up right beside him. I gently but firmly nudged his shoulder, pushing him away from the center of the podium, and pulled the microphone slightly closer to my mouth. "That is a fascinating legal theory, Julian," I said, my voice echoing with crisp, unwavering authority. "But I think you are forgetting a very recent, very crucial piece of paperwork." I reached into the pocket of my simple black dress. I pulled out a neatly folded thick stack of premium legal paper. It was the exact same document Beatrice had slammed onto the table at the country club just a few days ago. I unfolded it slowly, taking my time, smoothing the creases against the top of the wooden podium. Julian looked down at the document. His confident smirk instantly faltered. "You see, everyone," I continued, addressing the silent, captivated ballroom. "Just last week, my mother-in-law and my husband ambushed me. They were absolutely terrified that my modest blue-collar archiving business might somehow drain their precious family resources. So they forced me to sign an ironclad, completely non-negotiable post-nuptial agreement to protect their assets from me." Julian swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the paper, recognizing the bold legal header. Down on the floor. Beatrice took a sudden, staggering step forward, her hands shaking as the dread began to creep back into her throat. "My husband was so eager to take my small business and protect his own wealth that he clearly did not bother to consult a competent lawyer about the specific clauses his mother demanded," I stated, running my finger down the highlighted section on page 4. I leaned directly into the microphone. "Let me read Section 7, Paragraph 2 aloud for total clarity. It states, and I quote, 'All inherited wealth, familial trusts, and legacy assets acquired by either party prior to or during the marriage shall remain 100% separate property. Neither spouse shall have any legal claim, access, or right to marital distribution regarding said inherited funds.'" The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. I turned my head and looked directly into Julian's terrified eyes. "My lawyer Eleanor made sure this specific clause was bulletproof, Julian. Your mother insisted on it because she thought she was locking me out of your phantom corporate wealth. She wanted to make sure the poor girl who dusts old books could never touch a single dime of your family money." Julian started shaking his head. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. "No, that cannot apply to this. That was just for the house. That was just for your business. It applies to everything." I corrected him, my voice ringing out like a judge delivering a final sentence. "It applies to my father's trust. The $78 million sitting in the Four-Star Foundation accounts is 100% my separate property. You have absolutely zero legal right to it. You cannot authorize a grant. You cannot touch the principal. You cannot even look at the interest." I picked up the post-nuptial agreement and tapped it hard against his chest. "Your mother's ironclad contract worked perfectly, Julian. It successfully protected $78 million. It just protected it from you." Julian stumbled backward. His legs hit the edge of a stage monitor and he nearly collapsed. He looked down at the ballroom floor, making direct eye contact with Beatrice. The realization crashed down on them simultaneously. Beatrice had paid a shady lawyer to draft the very document that was now burying them alive. She had handed me the exact shield I needed to permanently lock her son out of the massive fortune that could have saved his life. The Chicago gambling syndicate was coming for his $2 million debt. The deadline was expiring tonight, and Julian had just realized that he was standing inches away from a $78 million gold mine that he was legally forbidden from ever touching. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his perfect corporate mask entirely shattered into a million irreversible pieces. He opened his mouth to argue, to scream, to demand something else, but there were no words left. I was suffocating on his own blinding greed, and I was holding the only legal key to his survival. The deafening silence that had gripped the ballroom finally shattered into a roaring wave of scandalized whispers, dropped champagne flutes, and the frantic clicking of press cameras. Wealthy donors and politicians were actively climbing over each other to view the imploding Vance dynasty. Julian remained frozen at the podium, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. His mother's legal maneuver had sealed his doom. He backed away, his expensive tuxedo suddenly looking like a prison uniform. Down on the main floor, Beatrice was slumped against a cocktail table, clutching her chest as her elite social standing burned to the ground. But the Vance family delusion ran deep. Cutting through the chaotic crowd came Chloe, sprinting toward the stage in her plunging emerald gown. Her face was already contorted into a mask of exaggerated theatrical agony. She had watched Julian retreat in defeat, realizing the affluent lifestyle she felt entitled to was evaporating. True to her nature, Chloe deployed the only strategy she knew. She weaponized her fragility. "Maya, how could you do this?" Chloe shrieked, her high-pitched voice cutting sharply through the chatter. She threw herself hard against the edge of the stage, looking up with perfectly timed tears streaming down her pale cheeks. "You are destroying this family. Julian gave you everything, and you are having a violent, aggressive meltdown because you are jealous of our success." She was doing it again. Right in front of 500 high society guests, Chloe was painting me as the angry, irrational black woman, attacking the generous family that supposedly saved her. She cried louder, putting a trembling hand over her heart, making sure the antique South Sea pearls she had stolen from my office safe caught the bright stage lights. Marcus trailed closely behind her, looking mortified but unwilling to stop her performance. "Look at what you are doing to your mother-in-law," Chloe sobbed, pointing at me. "Beatrice is having a medical emergency because of your hostile behavior. You do not belong here, Maya. You are a bitter, vindictive woman, and you need to be removed before you hurt someone else." I did not raise my voice. I simply looked down at Chloe, watching her desperate performance with chilling serenity. She thought her tears were an impenetrable shield. She actually thought the wealthy crowd would instantly rally to her defense and cast me out, oblivious to the fact that I had already locked every exit. "You are right about one thing, Chloe," I said, leaning into the microphone. "Someone definitely needs to be removed from this ballroom tonight." I lifted my hand and made a brief gesture toward the heavy velvet curtains draped along the right wing of the stage. The heavy red fabric parted immediately. 3 imposing figures stepped out from the shadows and walked down the stairs. 2 were uniformed police officers. The third was a man in a sharp federal suit flashing a silver badge. Chloe saw the uniforms approaching and let out a triumphant, watery gasp. She quickly wiped her eyes, her fake sorrow morphing into a wicked smirk. "Thank goodness security is here," Chloe announced to the crowd. "Officers, you need to arrest this woman immediately. She is trespassing and acting dangerously erratic. Get her out of here right now." I stood perfectly silently at the podium, watching the officers bypass the stage. They marched straight past Beatrice, who was still gasping for air against the cocktail table. They walked directly up to Chloe. The federal agent stepped into her personal space, completely immune to her dramatic tears. "Chloe Vance," the federal agent stated, his voice loud and ringing with authority. "You are under arrest for grand larceny and the unauthorized possession of a federally insured military heirloom. Place your hands behind your back." Chloe froze. Her smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of sheer confusion. She looked around wildly, assuming this was some kind of terrible misunderstanding. "Excuse me," Chloe scoffed, stepping backward and bumping into Marcus. "I think you have the wrong person. I am a VIP guest. I have not stolen anything in my life." The agent did not flinch. He pointed a rigid finger directly at the glowing South Sea pearls resting heavily against her collarbone. "The jewelry you are currently wearing was reported stolen from a locked commercial safe earlier this week," he explained, pulling steel handcuffs from his belt. Those pearls belong to the estate of General Arthur Sterling. They are embedded with microscopic laser-engraved serial numbers, actively tracked by a federal military insurance registry. We scanned them the moment you walked through the front doors of this hotel. The blood drained from Chloe's face so fast she looked like a ghost. She reached up her trembling fingers, frantically clawing at the clasp of the necklace, desperately trying to rip the stolen heirloom off her skin. No, she stammered, her voice pitching into genuine panic. This is a mistake. Maya gave these to me. Julian Marcus, tell them. She gave them to me. I leaned into the microphone. I never gave you anything, Chloe, I stated coldly, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. You walked into my office, you treated my staff like garbage, and you stole my family legacy right off my desk because you thought you were untouchable. You thought your tears would always protect you from the consequences of your own greed. You thought wrong. One of the uniformed officers grabbed Chloe's wrists, spinning her around and snapping the handcuffs shut with a loud, definitive click. Chloe let out a piercing scream of terror. She thrashed against the officers, sobbing uncontrollably, begging her husband to do something. Marcus, humiliated and terrified of being charged as an accomplice, physically backed away from her, raising his hands in surrender and melting into the crowd. Beatrice could only watch in mute horror as her precious daughter-in-law was aggressively marched out of the grand ballroom in handcuffs, her emerald gown dragging across the floor. Chloe's frantic cries echoed down the hallway until the heavy wooden doors swung shut, cutting her off completely. I stepped back from the podium, looking down at the absolute wreckage of the Vance family. Their fake charity was exposed. Julian was legally locked out of a massive fortune with a mob debt looming over his head. And Chloe was sitting in the back of a police cruiser, facing federal felony charges. I had not laid a single finger on any of them, but I had utterly destroyed their lives, using nothing but their own incredibly arrogant mistakes. The morning sun offered no mercy to the ruins of Julian Vance. Less than 12 hours had passed since I walked out of that ballroom, leaving my former in-laws to choke on the ashes of their shattered social empire. I spent the night sleeping peacefully in a luxury suite booked under Eleanor's corporate account. My phone turned off, completely detached from the frantic implosion happening across the city. Julian, however, did not sleep. I was pacing the hardwood floors of the Beacon Hill house, the house he had stolen from me, the house that was now entirely his legal responsibility. At precisely 7 in the morning, the heavy brass knocker on the front door pounded with a rhythm that did not belong to a delivery driver or a neighbor. It was a slow, deliberate, terrifying sound. Julian approached the door, his hands trembling. He had ignored 30 missed calls from unknown Chicago area codes throughout the night. He opened the door a fraction of an inch, peeking through the gap. 3 men stood on the porch. They did not wear ski masks or carry baseball bats. They wore impeccably tailored suits that probably cost more than Julian's entire wardrobe. The man in the center, an imposing figure with a cold, dead stare, simply pushed the heavy oak door open, forcing Julian to stumble backward into the foyer. "Good morning, Julian," the lead enforcer said, stepping onto my vintage rug and casually wiping his leather shoes. "You missed your deadline last night. We waited for the $5 million wire transfer your mother promised. It never arrived." Julian raised his hands in a frantic, placating gesture. "There was a misunderstanding at the charity gala. The funds were temporarily delayed due to a legal technicality with my wife. I just need a little more time. Give me 48 hours. I have assets." The enforcer chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the high ceilings of the hallway. He walked past Julian, inspecting the crown molding and the expensive artwork I had carefully curated over the years. "We do not do extensions, Julian. We do collections. You owe $2 million. Since your mother's accounts were just frozen by the federal government this morning, we are here to collect from the primary debtor." Julian swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. "You cannot take anything from here. This house belongs to my wife. She comes from a wealthy military family. If you touch this property, she will unleash a team of federal lawyers on you." The enforcer stopped admiring a painting and turned slowly to face Julian. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He tossed it onto the entryway console table. It was a copy of the post-nuptial agreement. You really should coordinate your lies better, Julian the enforcer stated, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You filed this document with the county clerk yesterday afternoon, desperate to prove you had collateral. This document clearly states that your wife transferred 100% of the deed to this property directly into your name. It is legally yours, which means it is legally ours. We are seizing this house today. Julian stared at the copy of the post-nuptial agreement, his lungs refusing to take in air. The trap Beatrice had designed to protect him had just become the very cage locking him in with the wolves. He had signed his name, eager to steal my sanctuary, completely oblivious to the fact that he was handing his creditors a perfectly packaged, legally seizable asset. Wait, Julian begged, stepping between the enforcer and the living room. You cannot just take the house. It is tied up in marital litigation. It will take months for you to liquidate it through the courts. But I have something else. Something better. Something liquid. The two men standing by the door shifted their weight, cracking their knuckles. The lead enforcer crossed his arms. I am listening. I own commercial real estate, Julian blurted out, desperation making his voice crack. Yesterday morning I assumed total executive control of a massive brick warehouse in the historic district. It sits on prime real estate. Developers have been trying to buy out that block for years. The deed is completely in my name, signed and finalized. You can seize the building. It is worth easily double what I owe you. You can sell it to a developer by the end of the month and walk away with a massive profit. The enforcer raised an eyebrow, mildly intrigued. A commercial building in the historic district. Show me the proof of ownership and the clear title. If it checks out, we might consider it a down payment on your life. Julian let out a ragged gasp of relief. He scrambled over to the kitchen island where he had left his laptop the night before. He frantically typed in his password, his fingers slipping on the keys. He pulled up the city property registry portal, desperate to prove his newly acquired corporate wealth. He just needed to show them the clean title transfer he had signed at my archiving facility. He navigated to his personal financial dashboard, eager to display his triumph. But the screen did not show a clean commercial title. A massive, bright red notification banner dominated the entire computer screen. Julian blinked, leaning closer, praying. It was a glitch. It was not a glitch. The screen displayed an emergency credit alert from his bank, alongside an official digital notice from the city building department. When Julian had signed that lease transfer, he arrogantly dismissed the physical piece of paper the inspector handed him. He thought he could fight the penalty later. He thought he could bury the paperwork in corporate bureaucracy. But my lawyer Eleanor did not leave loose ends. She had filed the necessary legal motions simultaneously with the inspector's visit. The red text on the screen burned into Julian's retinas. The $500,000 structural penalty fine had bypassed the corporate protection entirely. Because Julian signed the specific liability assumption clause in Beatrice's post-nuptial agreement, the massive debt had bypassed all legal shields and attached directly to his personal social security number. The commercial building was instantly flagged as a toxic asset. The city had placed an immediate, unmovable lion on the warehouse until the $500,000 was paid in full. No developer could touch it. No bank would finance it. It was completely unsellable. And because the enormous debt was now tied to his personal credit, Julian's score had plummeted overnight, triggering automatic defaults on his luxury car lease and his personal credit cards. The enforcer walked up behind Julian, peering over his shaking shoulder at the glowing laptop screen. He read the bright red penalty notice. He saw the toxic lien. He saw the negative $500,000 balance flashing next to Julian's name. The enforcer let out a slow, disappointed sigh. He reached out and slammed the laptop shut, nearly trapping Julian's fingers. You just tried to hand us a poisoned asset, Julian, the enforcer growled, grabbing Julian by the collar of his expensive dress shirt and slamming him hard against the marble kitchen counter. You tried to pawn off a condemned building carrying a $500,000 government fine. Do you think we are stupid? Do you think you can play games with Chicago? I did not know, Julian shrieked, tears of sheer panic finally springing to his eyes. I swear I did not know about the fine. My wife set me up. She tricked me into signing it. Your wife is a genius, the enforcer replied coldly, tightening his grip on Julian's throat. But you are just a liability. We are taking the house, Julian. Pack a single bag. You have 10 minutes to get off our property before we break both of your legs. While Julian was being thrown out of his front door by Chicago gambling enforcers, his mother was in a state of unhinged panic across town. Beatrice Vance sped her leased Mercedes through downtown Boston, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned ashen. Julian had called her 10 minutes prior, weeping from the sidewalk, begging her to liquidate the charity accounts immediately to save his life. The mob had taken the house, but it was not enough. They wanted cash, and they wanted it today. Beatrice pulled directly into the valet zone of the First National Bank, throwing her keys at an attendant. She marched through the towering brass doors, her designer heels echoing against the pristine marble floors. This was a private wealth management branch, a place where Beatrice spent the last decade parading around as a high society philanthropist. She bypassed the reception desk, entirely ignoring the polite greetings of the security staff, and walked straight up to the senior teller station. "I need an immediate, expedited wire transfer," Beatrice commanded, slamming her custom leather handbag onto the polished counter. "Route whatever liquid cash is available in the Vance Community Foundation portfolio directly to the Chicago holding company I listed yesterday. Empty the entire operational account right now. Do not make me wait." The senior teller, a young man who usually fawned over Beatrice's elite status, blinked in surprise at her erratic behavior. He nervously adjusted his glasses and began typing rapidly on his keyboard. Beatrice tapped her manicured fingernails against the marble, her breathing shallow and fast. She knew she was draining a charity fund. She knew it was highly illegal to wire nonprofit donations to an offshore sports betting syndicate. But she did not care. Protecting her son was the only thing that mattered. Mrs. Vance, the teller, stammered, his eyes darting between his screen and her flushed face. "I am receiving a hard error code on your portfolio. I cannot authorize any transfers. In fact, I cannot even view your current available balance. The system is completely locking me out." Beatrice slammed her hand flat against the counter. "What do you mean you cannot view the balance? I am the sole signatory on that account. I am a pillar of this community. Call your branch manager right this second. Tell Richard to override this ridiculous system glitch before I move my entire financial portfolio to a competing bank and have you fired for incompetence. You will not be moving a single dime to any bank, Beatrice." The cool, commanding voice did not come from a bank manager. It came from directly behind her. Beatrice spun around. Eleanor Vance, my powerhouse estate attorney, was standing in the center of the lobby. Eleanor wore a tailored navy blue suit, carrying a sleek leather briefcase, radiating an aura of absolute terrifying calm. She had been waiting in the private lounge specifically for this moment. "Who let you in here?" Beatrice hissed, taking a threatening step toward my lawyer. "You are Maya's little paper pusher. You have no jurisdiction in my private bank. You are just a glorified clerk for a girl who dusts old books. Get out of my sight before I have security throw you onto the street." Eleanor did not raise her voice. She calmly walked up to the marble counter, standing shoulder to shoulder with a woman who had spent a lifetime weaponizing her class status against other African American women. "You use black excellence as a cheap costume," Beatrice Eleanor stated, her voice dropping into a deadly register that silenced the lobby. "You host lavish galas and exploit the struggles of underserved youth to line your own pockets. You look down on hardworking women like Maya because you are terrified someone will realize you are completely hollow inside. You do not have social standing. You have a mountain of fraud and it just collapsed." Beatrice scoffed, trying to maintain her mask of arrogant superiority. "You are speaking nonsense. My charity is a prestigious organization. Now step aside so the teller can wire my funds. My son needs that money immediately." "The teller cannot wire the funds," Eleanor replied smoothly, opening her briefcase, "because the bank no longer controls those accounts." Eleanor pulled a thick, stark white document from her briefcase and slid it firmly across the counter. It stopped right beneath Beatrice's trembling hands. The document bore a massive, undeniable seal at the very top. It was the official emblem of the Department of the Treasury. Beatrice stared down at the paper. The bold black letters stamped across the header read, "Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Notice of immediate asset freeze and comprehensive federal audit." "My client is a meticulous woman," Eleanor explained, watching sheer terror wash over Beatrice's face. When Maya discovered Julian was heavily indebted to a gambling syndicate, she did not just run to me. She ran a full forensic background check on your precious charity. Maya spent the last week quietly compiling every fake invoice, every ghost payroll, and every illegal transfer you made to cover Julian's losses. Beatrice began to shake uncontrollably, her fingers hovering over the federal document, entirely unable to touch it. Maya packaged your fraudulent ledgers into a very neat digital file. Eleanor continued, her voice sharp as a razor. And she submitted that file directly to the IRS tax fraud tip line 7 days ago. The federal government does not take charity fraud lightly. The IRS seized your accounts at exactly 8 o'clock this morning. They froze every single asset, every penny of donated money, and every personal account tied to your Social Security number. No, Beatrice gasped, her voice cracking as the reality of her total destruction set in. No, you cannot do this. Julian needs that money today. The men in Chicago, they will kill him. They will hurt my boy. Please, I need to send the wire. Eleanor snapped her briefcase shut. The loud click echoed like a gunshot in the silent bank. Then you better hope Julian runs very fast, Eleanor said coldly. Because the federal government has your money now. And unlike the Chicago mob, the IRS does not break legs. They just lock you in a federal penitentiary for 20 years. Beatrice's knees buckled. She collapsed against the marble counter, letting out a raw, devastating sob of pure panic. She clutched her designer purse to her chest, hyperventilating as the elite bank patrons she had always tried to impress watched her humiliating downfall. She had tried to steal my business to save her son, and in return I had handed her directly to the federal government. While Beatrice was collapsing onto the marble floor of the First National Bank, I was quietly moving into the real crown jewel of my inheritance. My father had not just left me a massive trust fund. He had also left me his primary residence. It was a sprawling $15 million gated estate, nestled deep in the wooded hills of Brookline. The property was a fortress. General Sterling had designed it with maximum privacy and military-grade security in mind. High stone walls surrounded the perimeter, and a reinforced steel gate blocked the winding driveway. For the first time since I married Julian, I felt completely safe. I spent 3 days unpacking my personal archives, setting up my new home office, and ignoring the frantic news alerts about the sudden collapse of the Vance family charity. By Thursday afternoon, the desperation of my former in-laws reached its absolute peak. I was sitting in my father's leather armchair, reviewing the blueprints to buy back my commercial archiving building, when a sharp chime echoed from the smart home security panel on my desk. The perimeter breach alarm was flashing. I tapped the screen, bringing up the live video feed from the front gate cameras. I leaned forward, studying the high-definition monitors. Julian and Beatrice were standing outside my heavy steel gates. They did not look like the elite, untouchable socialites who had mocked my blue-collar job just a few days ago. They looked absolutely destroyed. Julian was wearing the same wrinkled suit he had on when the Chicago enforcers threw him out of my house. His tie was missing, his shirt collar was torn, and he was pacing erratically, looking over his shoulder every few seconds. Beatrice looked even worse. Her signature perfectly coiffed hair was a tangled mess. She was clutching her designer handbag like a flotation device, her face pale and exhausted. The federal government had locked her out of every single bank account she owned, and the mob had officially taken possession of the Beacon Hill property. They were completely homeless, penniless, and running out of time. Julian stepped up to the thick stone pillar holding the intercom system. He pressed the call button, frantically mashing his thumb against the metal plate over and over again. Maya, Julian shouted into the speaker, his voice cracking with raw panic. Maya, I know you are in there. Please, you have to open the gate. You have to let us in. They are looking everywhere for me. I sat back in my leather chair. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I pressed the audio connect button on the screen, letting my voice project through the outdoor speakers. You are trespassing on private property, I stated calmly, watching them both jump at the sound of my voice. State your business, or I am dispatching the estate security team to remove you. Beatrice shoved Julian aside and grabbed the intercom grill with both hands. Maya, please, Beatrice begged, tears streaming down her face. Her voice was completely stripped of its usual arrogant venom. We have nowhere else to go. The federal agents seized my house this morning. They took my cars. They locked the doors to the charity headquarters. The men from Chicago took Julian's car and threw us onto the street. We have not slept in 2 days. You have to help us. We are your family. I let out a harsh, echoing laugh that crackled through the intercom. You are not my family, Beatrice. You made that perfectly clear when you called my life's work a pathetic hobby. You made that clear when you ambushed me with a fake lawyer and tried to steal everything I had built. You are just a fraud who got caught playing a game you could not afford. Julian pushed his mother out of the way, pressing his face close to the camera lens. Maya listened. He pleaded, his eyes wide and terrified. I am sorry. I was wrong. I was stressed about the debts and I took it out on you. But we are a black family, Maya. We have to stick together when the system comes for us. You cannot just leave your husband out here to be murdered by the syndicate. You have $78 million. You can pay off the Chicago guys right now with one wire transfer. You can hire lawyers to get my mother out of this IRS mess. Just open the gate and let us fix this together. I stared at the monitor, absolutely disgusted by his cowardice. He was trying to weaponize our race, trying to invoke cultural solidarity, only after he had spent our entire marriage treating me like a second-class citizen. He did not care about family loyalty when he locked my business accounts to starve my employees. He only cared about solidarity now because it was his only shield against a bullet. You do not get to invoke our community now, Julian, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly cold pitch. You spent years looking down on hardworking black folks. Your mother built a fake charity using the struggles of black children to launder money for your degenerate gambling addiction. You two are a disgrace. You sold us out for a seat at a country club that did not even want you. Maya, I am begging you, Julian cried out, actually falling to his knees on the concrete driveway. He gripped the iron bars of the gate, shaking them violently. Please. They told me I have until midnight. If I do not have the $2 million, they are going to kill me. You are my wife. You promised to protect me. I looked at the man groveling in the dirt. I thought about the moment he walked into our house, stood next to his mother, and handed me that gold pen. I remembered the exact cold, dead look in his eyes when he told me my livelihood meant nothing. I reached out and rested my finger on the disconnect button. It is just business, Julian, I said, feeding his exact words right back to him through the intercom. You do not know how to manage money anyway. I pressed the button, cutting the audio feed completely. I watched the silent video monitors as Julian collapsed onto the pavement, sobbing uncontrollably, while Beatrice screamed silently into the wind. I picked up my coffee, turned away from the screen, and went back to reading my blueprints. I barely had time to review the second page of my architectural plans before my cell phone began buzzing relentlessly on the edge of the mahogany desk. It was not Julian or Beatrice. It was a rapid-fire series of text messages from my lead archivist, Marcus, and several other employees. My stomach tightened as I opened the first message. It contained a link to a social media platform with a single warning attached. You need to see this right now. I clicked the link. The screen filled with the pale, tear-streaked face of my sister-in-law. Chloe was sitting in what looked like the sterile lobby of a bail bondsman office, wearing a baggy gray sweatshirt to emphasize her supposed fragility. She had propped her phone up to record a live broadcast. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was actively utilizing the exact same fake hysterical breathing she had used in my living room when she tried to pawn my father's watch. Hi, everyone! Chloe whimpered into the camera, wiping away a perfectly timed tear. I am recording this because I am terrified for my life, and I need the truth out there. Last night, I was wrongfully arrested at a charity gala. I was targeted and framed by an incredibly angry, aggressive black woman named Maya Sterling. She is my brother-in-law's wife, and she has been violently harassing me for weeks because she is insanely jealous of my family. She planted stolen jewelry on me to ruin my reputation. Please share this. I am pregnant and I am scared of what she will do next. I stared at the screen, watching the view count skyrocket. 50,000 views. 100,000 views. The comment section was a toxic wasteland of people blindly rushing to her defense, eating up her weaponized white tears and hurling horrific racial slurs at me without a single shred of evidence. Chloe had bonded out of jail on a grand larceny charge and immediately decided her best survival strategy was to play the ultimate victim. She was relying on centuries of societal conditioning that taught her people would instantly believe a crying white woman over a successful black woman. She had no idea she was bringing a butter knife to a drone strike. I did not panic. I did not record an emotional response video defending my character. I simply set my phone down and opened a secure encrypted folder on my laptop. When Chloe marched into my archiving company to play the tyrannical boss, she completely ignored the small black domes mounted in the corners of the ceiling. My facility housed millions of dollars worth of irreplaceable African American historical artifacts. The entire building was wired with state-of-the-art, high-definition security cameras featuring crystal-clear audio recording capabilities. I pulled up the exact timestamp from the day she and Julian tried to illegally seize my business. I isolated the footage from my private glass-enclosed office. The video quality was absolute perfection. I watched the screen as high definition. Chloe strutted behind my desk, opening the steel safe I had deliberately left unlatched. I listened to the crisp audio of her gasping in pure greed as she found my father's South Sea pearl earrings. Then the footage showed me walking in, demanding she put them down. The audio captured her vile response with stunning clarity. I heard her mocking tone as she threatened to call the police and falsely claim an angry, aggressive black woman was attacking her. I heard her explicitly weaponize her race and her pregnancy, stating the police would always believe her over me. I watched her drop the stolen federally insured military heirlooms directly into her designer tote bag before smirking and walking away. It was the most damning, irrefutable piece of evidence imaginable. She had literally laid out her entire racist criminal strategy on a 4K security camera. I did not send the video to a news outlet. I did not send it to Chloe. I uploaded the raw, unedited security footage directly as a video reply to her viral post. I added a single sentence as the caption. When you play the victim, make sure you check the room for cameras first. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. The internet is a ruthless machine, and it operates with terrifying speed. Within 10 minutes, the momentum of Chloe's pity party slammed into a brick wall. Users who had been defending her just moments ago watched the security footage. They heard the venom in her voice. They saw her explicitly outline how she planned to use the police to frame a black woman. They watched her physically steal the pearls she just claimed were planted on her. The backlash was absolute and it was biblical. The view count on my response video hit 2 million in under an hour. Prominent cultural commentators, attorneys, and social justice advocates amplified the footage across every major platform. The hashtag Chloe Vance is a thief began trending nationally. Internet sleuths immediately identified the background of her original video, locating the exact bail bondsman office she was sitting in. Her social media pages were flooded with tens of thousands of comments exposing her lies and demanding accountability. Chloe frantically tried to delete her original video, but the internet is forever. Screen recordings were already everywhere. She tried to deactivate her accounts, but the damage was irreversible. She had effectively broadcast her own hate crime to the entire world. Then the corporate dominoes began to fall. The Vance family men always shared one defining trait. They were incredibly cowardly when their personal image was threatened. Marcus Julian's brother had slinked away at the charity gala the moment the federal agents put handcuffs on his wife. He had bailed her out of jail through a third-party attorney wanting to keep his hands clean. But Marcus was a junior partner at a prestigious downtown investment firm. By noon, his phone was ringing off the hook. His partners had seen the viral video of his wife spouting racist threats and admitting to grand larceny. Clients were threatening to pull their portfolios. Marcus was facing an immediate career-ending scandal by association. He did exactly what his mother Beatrice had trained him to do. He protected his own skin at all costs. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Eleanor. I answered it, keeping my eyes on the skyrocketing view count of my post. "I hope you are enjoying the show," Maya Eleanor said, her voice rich with amusement. "I just received a courtesy call from Marcus Vance's legal counsel. He is terrified of being dragged into the federal theft investigation. Marcus just served Chloe with emergency divorce papers and filed a restraining order to get her out of his condominium." I let out a slow, satisfied breath. "He is cutting her off." "Completely," Eleanor confirmed. He froze their joint accounts to protect his assets and formally notified the bail bondsman that he is withdrawing his financial backing. Chloe is currently standing on a sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on her back. She has no money, no husband, and a federal court date next week. She tried to play the ultimate victim, and she ended up canceling her entire existence. I hung up the phone and looked out the massive windows of my father's estate. The air felt incredibly clear. The woman who had marched into my home demanded my master bedroom and tried to pawn my family. Legacy was now a public pariah sleeping on the street. She had dug her own grave and I had simply handed her the shovel. The absolute destruction of Chloe was just the opening act. The main event took place 2 weeks later inside a sterile, imposing courtroom in downtown Boston. The heavy wooden doors sealed shut behind me as I took my seat next to Eleanor at the petitioner's table. Across the aisle sat Julian. He looked like a hollowed-out shell of the arrogant corporate consultant I had married. His custom-tailored suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame. The Chicago syndicate was hunting him. The federal government was auditing his mother, and the crushing stress was eating him alive. But the moment the judge walked in, Julian immediately attempted to put his fake polished mask back on. This was our divorce hearing, and Julian had come to court to play his favorite game. He was going to play the victim. Julian had hired a cheap, desperate attorney named Richard, who specialized in squeezing alimony out of wealthy spouses. Since Beatrice had forced me to sign that post-nuptial agreement, it completely blocked Julian from touching my $78 million inheritance. He had to find another angle to get my money. His new strategy was to claim that my archiving business, the exact same business he had mocked and tried to steal, was entirely dependent on his financial support during our marriage. Your Honor. Richard began puffing out his chest and pacing in front of the judge. My client, Julian Vance, sacrificed his own lucrative corporate career to support his wife. He was the primary breadwinner, providing the financial stability that allowed Maya to pursue her historical archiving hobby. Now that she has come into an unforeseen massive inheritance, she is abruptly discarding him and leaving him completely destitute. We are asking the court for $10,000 a month in permanent spousal support to maintain the standard of living he generously provided for her. I sat perfectly still, keeping my face completely blank. Julian actually had the audacity to wipe a fake tear from his eye, looking up at the judge like a discarded, wounded husband. He was using the very business he had called a pathetic blue-collar joke to beg for a monthly allowance. He wanted me to finance his illegal gambling debts under the guise of spousal support. The judge, an older, no-nonsense woman, peered over her glasses at Julian. She then turned her severe gaze to our side of the room. Counselor, what is your response to this request for spousal support? Eleanor stood up slowly, adjusting the cuffs of her immaculate navy suit. She did not pace around the room. She did not raise her voice. She simply picked up a thick black binder from our table and walked directly to the center podium. Your Honor. Eleanor stated, her voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. My opposing counsel has just presented a fascinating fairy tale. Julian Vance did not support my client's business. He treated my client's operating accounts like his own personal piggy bank to fund a severe and highly illegal gambling addiction. Julian's fake tears vanished instantly. He shot upright in his chair, his eyes darting frantically toward his lawyer. Richard stammered, objecting loudly, claiming Eleanor was making baseless, defamatory accusations just to avoid paying alimony. The judge banged her gavel, silencing the desperate lawyer. I will allow it, Counselor, the judge said, looking intently at Eleanor. Proceed with your evidence. Eleanor opened the black binder and handed a stack of highlighted banking documents to the court clerk, who passed them up to the judge. I provided a copy to opposing counsel, she noted, watching Richard frantically flip through the pages with shaking hands. Your Honor. Eleanor continued. Those documents are certified forensic bank statements from my client's business, operating accounts, covering the entire duration of this brief marriage. You will notice a highly disturbing pattern. On the 15th of every month, Julian Vance used his status as a husband to access those joint accounts. But he did not deposit money to support his wife. Instead, he initiated unauthorized wire transfers, draining thousands of dollars at a time. The judge reviewed the papers, her expression darkening with every page she turned. These transfers are routed to a holding company in Chicago, the judge noted, her voice turning incredibly sharp. Exactly, Your Honor, Eleanor replied smoothly. That holding company is a known front for an unregulated sports betting syndicate. My client works grueling 18-hour days, preserving African American history. She employed 10 hardworking individuals who relied on her to feed their families. Julian Vance systematically embezzled their payroll funds to pay off his bookies. He stole over $120,000 from his own wife's business over the course of their marriage. I watched Julian shrink down into his leather chair. He could not look at the judge. He could not look at me. The pristine image of the successful black corporate king he had sold to the world was being publicly dissected and exposed as a massive parasitic fraud. This is an outrage, Richard yelled, trying to salvage the unsalvageable situation. My client was merely moving funds for investment purposes. These documents prove nothing about his actual intent. Eleanor did not even look at the panicked lawyer. She pulled a small digital transcript document from her folder. Do you need me to submit the text messages, Your Honor? I have 30 pages of Julian Vance actively threatening his bookies, begging for extensions, and promising to drain his wife's business accounts to cover his losses. He even bragged to his mother that he froze my client's payroll explicitly to force her into bankruptcy so he could liquidate her commercial building. The judge slammed her hand down on the paperwork. She had heard enough. She glared at Julian with a level of disgust that could melt steel. Mr. Vance, the judge, said, her voice echoing like thunder through the quiet courtroom. You sit in my courtroom and demand spousal support from a woman whose business you actively embezzled from. You claim to be a provider while the evidence clearly shows you are nothing but a common thief. The audacity you possess to ask this court to reward your financial abuse is absolutely staggering. Julian opened his mouth, trying to formulate a defense, trying to deploy the charm that had always saved him in the past. But there was no charm left. The judge cut him off before he could speak a single word. The request for spousal support is denied permanently, the judge declared, bringing her gavel down with a sharp, loud crack. Furthermore, based on the indisputable financial evidence presented today, I am holding you fully accountable for the funds you misappropriated during this marriage. Julian Vance, you are hereby ordered by this court to immediately repay the $120,000 you stole from Maya Vance's business accounts. This judgment will be attached as a mandatory restitution order. Julian let out a strangled, horrific gasp. He gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles turning completely white. He had walked into that courtroom hoping to secure a monthly paycheck to keep the Chicago syndicate from breaking his legs. Instead, Eleanor had masterfully flipped his own greed against him. I did not just lose his bid for alimony. He was now legally ordered by a federal judge to pay me $120,000, adding yet another massive, crushing anvil of debt onto his already collapsing life. He stared across the aisle at me, his eyes filled with absolute terror, knowing he had absolutely no way to pay it. The devastating finality of Julian's courtroom defeat sent shockwaves far beyond the courthouse walls. Word of the judge ordering him to repay the embezzled funds spread through Boston's black elite with the speed and destructive force of a wildfire. In the high society circles that Beatrice Vance had spent 3 decades clawing her way into perception was reality, and the reality was that the Vance family name was now entirely synonymous with federal fraud. I did not have to lift a single finger to destroy my mother-in-law's social standing. Her so-called friends did it for me. The very women who had sat at the Oak Ridge Country Club sipping mimosas while laughing at my ruined dress were the first to draw their knives. Beatrice received her formal expulsion letter from the country club by certified mail just 48 hours after my stage announcement. The board cited the highly publicized IRS raid on her charity as a direct violation of their moral conduct clause. 2 days after that, the elite church board, where Beatrice had served as treasurer for 15 years, held an emergency closed-door meeting. They unanimously voted to remove her from the congregation, entirely terrified that the federal government might audit the church's finances by association. Beatrice was instantly excommunicated from the only world she cared about. Her phone, which used to ring constantly with gala invitations and gossip, went completely dead. But social isolation was the least of her problems. The Internal Revenue Service had permanently frozen every single asset tied to her Social Security number. Her leased luxury vehicles were repossessed from the driveway of her heavily mortgaged suburban home. To keep herself out of a federal penitentiary, Beatrice had been forced to hire a cutthroat criminal defense attorney who demanded a massive cash retainer up front. With no access to credit, no charity funds to skim, and zero marketable corporate skills, the former queen of Boston's philanthropy scene had hit an absolute dead end. She had to get a job. She had to engage in the very manual labor she had spent her entire life mocking. I learned about her new employment completely by accident. As the fully publicized director of the massive four-star foundation, I was suddenly the most sought-after benefactor in the city. I was receiving daily invitations to exclusive events from people who genuinely wanted to partner with my father's legacy. On a brisk Tuesday afternoon, I accepted an invitation to a private philanthropy luncheon at the Wellington Room, a historic, incredibly exclusive dining establishment frequented by the city's top power brokers. I arrived at the restaurant wearing a custom-tailored charcoal gray suit. I carried no flashy designer logos projecting the quiet, undeniable power my father had taught me. I pushed open the heavy brass doors and stepped into the lavish, dimly lit foyer. The scent of expensive roasted meats and fine wine filled the air. I walked up to the dark mahogany hostess podium to announce my reservation. The woman standing behind the podium had her back turned to me, frantically sorting through a stack of leather-bound menus. She was wearing the restaurant's mandatory uniform, a stiff, cheap polyester black dress with a rigid white collar and sensible rubber-soled orthopedic shoes. "Welcome to the Wellington," the hostess recited in a flat, exhausted voice, turning around to face me. "How many in your party today?" The words died in her throat. Beatrice froze, her hands gripping the edges of the leather menus so tightly her knuckles turned bone white. All the color drained from her face. She looked at my pristine tailored suit, and then she looked down at her own cheap polyester uniform. The irony was so thick it practically choked the air out of the foyer. The woman who had shoved a catering apron into my chest and ordered me to check coats was now standing before me as a minimum-wage restaurant hostess. "Hello, Beatrice," I said, my voice smooth, calm, and perfectly polite. "I have a reservation under Maya Sterling. Table for 4. Beatrice swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically around the foyer. She looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. She tried to step back instinctively, trying to hide her uniform behind the tall wooden podium, but there was nowhere to run. She was on the clock. She was an employee, and I was the VIP guest. "Maya," Beatrice whispered, her voice cracking with profound, suffocating humiliation. "Please, do not do this," "Do what?" I replied, tilting my head slightly. "I am just here for a business lunch. I was invited by the regional director of the children's hospital. I hear the service here is supposed to be impeccable. Are you going to seat me, or should I speak to the floor manager about my reservation?" Beatrice flinched at the threat of management. She knew she was one customer complaint away from losing the paycheck, keeping her out of federal prison. She ducked her head, her former pride completely shattered into unrecognizable dust. She picked up 4 menus, her hands trembling violently. "Right this way," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. I followed Beatrice into the main dining room. The experience was a masterpiece of poetic justice. As Beatrice walked me through the crowded restaurant, I saw several women from her former country club circle sitting at a nearby table. They spotted Beatrice in her hostess uniform. The wealthy women immediately stopped eating, their eyes widening in shock before they leaned in to whisper viciously behind their linen napkins. Beatrice felt their stares. I watched her shoulders hunch forward, the sheer weight of her public disgrace physically crushing her spine. She led me to a prime table by the window. She set the menus down with shaky hands, refusing to make eye contact with me. "Your server will be right with you," Beatrice whispered, turning quickly to escape back to the safety of her podium. I enjoyed a magnificent 2-hour lunch with my colleagues, discussing multi-million-dollar grants for actual boots-on-the-ground community programs. We finalized a massive initiative to fund STEM education for Black youth across the city. It was the exact kind of work Beatrice had spent years pretending to do. When the lunch concluded, my guests departed through the side exit. I lingered behind, settling the bill before walking slowly back toward the front foyer. The lunch rush had died down, and Beatrice was standing alone behind the hostess podium, staring blankly at the floor. She looked exhausted, her feet clearly aching from standing in those rubber shoes all afternoon. I walked directly up to the podium. Beatrice stiffened, bracing herself for whatever insult she assumed I was about to hurl at her. She expected me to scream, to gloat, to drag her through the mud the way she had always done to me. Instead, I reached into my purse. I pulled out a crisp, brand-new $100 bill. I placed it gently on top of the reservation book right in front of her. Beatrice stared down at the money, her breath hitching in her throat. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with fresh, humiliating tears. "Keep the change, Beatrice," I said, my voice carrying no anger, only absolute chilling finality. "I know exactly how hard it is to work a service job. You should be proud. It is the first time in your life you have earned an honest dollar." I did not wait for her to respond. I turned and walked out the heavy brass doors, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight. I left the former queen of Boston high society standing behind a restaurant podium, desperately clutching $100 tip from the daughter-in-law she had tried to destroy. While I stepped out of the Wellington into the warm afternoon sun, leaving Beatrice to her new minimum wage reality, Julian was running entirely out of places to hide. The Chicago syndicate did not care about the post-nuptial agreement blowing up in his face. They did not care that the IRS had frozen his mother's accounts, or that her fake charity had been exposed to the entire city. They only cared about the $2 million he owed them, and his absolute deadline had officially expired. Julian had fled the city in a panic, checking into a filthy cash-only motel right off the interstate. He abandoned his custom-tailored suits for cheap sweatpants, terrified to use his own name or show his face in public. But men who run illegal underground sportsbooks do not lose track of their debtors. They have resources and a reach that Julian could not even begin to comprehend. According to the federal court documents Eleanor later placed on my desk, the syndicate enforcers found Julian on a rainy Thursday night. They did not bother to knock. They kicked the flimsy motel door off its hinges and dragged my estranged husband right out of his bed. They threw him against the stained, peeling wallpaper, pressing the cold, hard barrel of a weapon directly against his temple. They gave him one final, non-negotiable ultimatum. He had exactly 24 hours to produce the cash, or they would make sure the authorities never found his body. Julian was entirely cornered. His bank accounts were empty. He was legally ordered by a judge to repay me $120,000. He held a $500,000 structural fine on his personal credit because of the commercial building he blindly signed for. He had absolutely zero financial leverage left. The sheer terror of survival stripped away the very last ounce of his corporate pride. He knew the mob would execute him by Friday night, and his only shield against a bullet was a federal prison cell. Julian did the one thing he swore to his high society peers he would never do. He turned himself in. He stumbled into the downtown FBI field office early Friday morning, bruised, sweating profusely, and trembling like a leaf. He slammed his hands on the reception desk and begged the agents for federal protection. The agents dragged him into a stark interrogation room where he sat across from seasoned investigators who looked at his polished corporate resume with absolute disgust. Facing imminent death, Julian spilled everything. He handed over every single name, every routing number, and every illegal offshore account linked to the Chicago gambling syndicate. He offered to be their star witness, giving up the violent men who ran the operation in exchange for immediate physical safety. But the federal government does not hand out free witness protection plans to arrogant men who commit massive financial crimes. The prosecutors offered him a brutal plea deal. He would get his protective custody, but he had to plead guilty to federal wire fraud, money laundering, and illegal gambling operations. Julian had no choice. He signed the confession, officially trading his designer loafers for a Department of Corrections uniform. The sentencing hearing took place in a heavily guarded federal courtroom. I did not attend. I had no desire to waste my time watching him grovel before a judge. Eleanor sat in the back row to observe the proceedings on my behalf, taking meticulous notes for our records. She told me Julian looked completely broken. His wealthy elite friends were nowhere to be found. His brother Marcus had cut all ties to save his own investment firm. His mother Beatrice could not even afford the transportation fare to get to the courthouse. Julian stood completely alone before the federal judge, weeping uncontrollably as he apologized for his reckless behavior, begging for leniency, and claiming he was led astray by a toxic culture of corporate greed. The judge was entirely unmoved by his tears. Julian was sentenced to 3 years in a federal penitentiary, followed by 5 years of strict supervised release and massive mandatory financial restitution. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down, finalizing his total destruction. The man who had walked into my living room, handed me a gold pen, and told me I did not know how to manage money, was now a convicted felon stripped of every single freedom he possessed. They processed him immediately. Before they transported him to the secure federal holding facility, the intake officers granted him one standard phone call. They handed him a heavy plastic receiver mounted to a cold concrete wall. He could have called his lawyer. He could have called his mother, who was likely sitting in her cramped, dingy apartment, waiting for news of his fate. But in his final moments of freedom, Julian chose to dial the one person he knew actually possessed the power and the wealth to save him, even though he knew he had destroyed any chance of me answering. I was sitting in my father's leather armchair at the estate, going over the final architectural blueprints for my new museum project. The afternoon sun was pouring through the massive windows, bathing the room in a warm, peaceful glow. My cell phone vibrated on the edge of the mahogany desk, breaking the quiet silence. I picked up the phone and looked at the glowing screen. It was an automated incoming call from a federal correctional facility. The robotic voice prompt stated that an inmate named Julian Vance was attempting to reach me. The prompt asked me to press 1 to accept the charges, or press 2 to decline the call. I stared at the screen. I pictured Julian standing in a cold room wearing a jumpsuit, holding the phone to his ear with trembling hands. I pictured him holding his breath, desperately praying that I would pick up, praying that I would feel a sliver of pity for the man who tried to leave me with absolutely nothing. He wanted to hear my voice one last time. He wanted to beg for forgiveness, or maybe he just wanted the comfort of knowing I was still there waiting for him. I did not feel pity. I did not feel anger. I felt nothing but absolute, undeniable peace. I did not press 1. I did not press 2. I simply set the phone face down on the polished mahogany desk, picked up my hot cup of coffee, and let it ring. I listened to the soft, rhythmic buzzing against the wood until the automated system finally timed out and disconnected the call. I let him go straight to voicemail, ensuring his final memory as a free man was the deafening, suffocating silence of my complete indifference. The heavy silence in my father's office was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I let Julian's final desperate prison call echo into the void, the robotic automated voice finally cutting off and plunging the room back into absolute peace. I picked up my hot coffee, turned my back on the phone, and directed my full attention to the massive architectural blueprints spread across my polished mahogany desk. The past was permanently severed. The future required my absolute undivided focus. Julian's spectacular financial collapse had left a trail of bureaucratic wreckage, but Eleanor navigated the fallout with surgical, ruthless precision. When the city seized my original commercial warehouse to satisfy the massive municipal fines, Julian had foolishly assumed I simply waited for the government auction. Using a microscopic fraction of my $78 million trust, I bought back the exact brick building he had tried to steal from me. But I did not just buy the warehouse. I purchased the 2 adjacent vacant lots, securing the entire city block. The title was scrubbed clean, the property was legally mine, and the grand vision my father and I had always shared was finally ready to be realized. I poured my resources into completely gutting and expanding the facility. This was no longer going to be just a small, dusty archiving business. I was building a massive, state-of-the-art African-American historical museum and national archive. I hired top-tier Black architects, structural engineers, and elite contractors. We reinforced the original brick exterior while installing climate-controlled preservation vaults built to strict federal museum standards. We constructed expansive, interactive exhibition halls designed to showcase the brilliant, untold stories of our ancestors. Marcus, the senior archivist, Chloe had once treated like a common janitor was immediately promoted to chief curator of historical antiquities. I called him into my temporary office and handed him a contract that doubled his salary, providing him with a dedicated staff of 20 junior historians. Every single employee who had stood by me during Julian's brief tyrannical takeover received massive promotions and full comprehensive medical benefits. We worked grueling 18-hour days, not out of desperation, but out of pure, unadulterated passion. We were building a fortress of Black history, a place where our legacy could never be whitewashed, stolen or weaponized by arrogant people who only cared about social climbing. During the 6 months of intense construction, my phone rang constantly. But it was not creditors or mob enforcers. It was the elite high society women from the Oak Ridge Country Club. The very same women who had sat sipping mimosas while watching Chloe spill red wine on my dress suddenly wanted to be my best friends. They had smelled the $78 million and seen the press releases about my new museum. They called my office daily, offering to serve on my board of directors, hoping to attach their wealthy names to my rising cultural capital. I instructed my security team to block every single one of their numbers. When the former president of Beatrice's church board tried to mail me a $500,000 donation check to secure a VIP table at my grand opening, I returned it to sender via certified mail. I included a brief note stating that our institution did not accept funding from individuals associated with fraudulent charities. My museum would not be a playground for the superficial elite. It would be a sanctuary for the real community. The crisp autumn air bit at my cheeks as I stood outside the gleaming glass doors of my newly finished museum for the official grand opening gala. There were no rented luxury cars driven by men drowning in secret underground debt. There were no fake philanthropists laundering money to save their own skin. Instead, the street was lined with genuine community leaders, renowned university scholars, local educators, and everyday families who had traveled from across the country to donate their precious ancestral artifacts to our preservation vaults. I walked into the spectacular main atrium, my heels clicking sharply against the polished black marble floors. The space was breathtaking. Massive digital displays illuminated the towering walls, showcasing beautifully restored photographs of Black soldiers, brilliant inventors, and fierce civil rights leaders. In the center of the room stood a special glass-enclosed exhibit dedicated entirely to military excellence, honoring the profound legacy of my father. The air hummed with the joyful, authentic laughter of hundreds of people who actually respected the culture and the mission. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne, but no one snapped their fingers at them or treated them like invisible servants. There was a profound, undeniable sense of mutual respect and absolute dignity radiating through the entire building. Eleanor stood near the military exhibit holding a crystal flute of champagne. She wore a stunning, sharp emerald suit, looking every bit the fierce legal protector who had helped me execute this flawless victory. I walked over to her, raising my glass and clinking it gently against hers. We did not speak a single word about Beatrice, Chloe, or Julian. They were completely erased from our reality, banished to the miserable consequences of their own toxic greed. Marcus took the center stage, tapping the microphone to welcome our guests and introduce me for the official ribbon-cutting ceremony. The crowd erupted into genuine roaring applause. I stepped up to the wooden podium, looking out at the sea of beautiful, supportive faces. I did not have to fake a submissive smile or shrink myself to fit into a toxic manufactured family portrait. I stood incredibly tall, wealthy, in both financial capital and unshakable character, ready to officially open the doors to an enduring legacy that no one could ever take away from me. I leaned into the microphone, taking a deep, victorious breath, knowing I had finally built an empire completely untouchable by those who tried to break me. The grand opening of the Sterling African American Historical Museum and National Archive was a monumental triumph. I spent the remainder of that beautiful evening walking through the glowing exhibition halls, surrounded by scholars, students, and elders, who looked at the preserved artifacts with profound reverence. There was no desperate social climbing or hidden agendas. It was a celebration of pure, unadulterated truth. I had taken the very building Julian tried to use as a pawn in his corrupt gambling scheme and transformed it into an indestructible fortress of our heritage. Fast forward a year, and the dust from the Vance family implosion had fully settled into concrete reality. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales when you stop trying to fix people who are determined to break you. They had brought war to my doorstep expecting a quick surrender, but they met a general's daughter instead. Chloe learned this lesson in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a discount retail store on the outskirts of the city. After Marcus ruthlessly divorced her and froze every joint asset to save his own reputation, Chloe was left with absolutely nothing. The viral video of her racist meltdown made her completely unemployable in the corporate or high society world. Without her husband's money, or her weaponized victimhood to shield her, she was forced to take a minimum wage job folding cheap polyester sweaters at a strip mall. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Chloe recently tried to use her classic fake tears to get out of a reprimand from her teenage shift manager. The manager simply handed her a mop and told her to clean the fitting rooms or clock out permanently. The woman who once waltzed into my office demanding my master bedroom and stealing my federally insured pearls was now spending her days picking up discarded hangers and scrubbing scuff marks off linoleum floors. Her artificial privilege had entirely evaporated. Beatrice experienced an equally severe descent into absolute obscurity. The Internal Revenue Service did not offer plea deals for the decades of charity fraud she committed. While she managed to avoid federal prison by cooperating and liquidating every single asset she had ever touched, the government left her totally destitute. The former queen of Boston high society now lives in a cramped, drafty studio apartment situated above a noisy laundromat. The woman who used to lease luxury cars and sneer at my blue-collar archiving business now relies on public transportation and clips grocery coupons just to survive. She has no country club memberships, no charity galas, and zero friends. Her wealthy socialite peers completely erased her from their memory the moment the federal agents raided her home. Beatrice spends her days sitting in a tiny room that smells like industrial bleach, staring at the peeling wallpaper, completely isolated in the prison of poverty she spent her entire life mocking. And then there is Julian. He is serving his 3-year sentence in a federal penitentiary located 500 miles away. The immaculate bespoke suits and expensive watches are gone, replaced by a scratchy, oversized khaki uniform. He sleeps on a thin mattress in a sterile concrete cell, surrounded by men who do not care about his corporate consultant resume or his smooth-talking charm. Julian traded my unshakable loyalty for the approval of a mother who ruined him and a gambling syndicate that nearly killed him. Even when his 3 years are up, Julian will not walk out as a free man. He will walk out as a convicted felon, burdened by the mandatory federal restitution he still owes me, along with the massive penalties from the city structural fine he arrogantly signed for. He tried to drain my bank accounts to save himself, and instead, he engineered his own permanent financial and social execution. He is a ghost buried alive by his own staggering greed and pathetic arrogance. As for me, my life has never been more vibrant, purposeful, or clear. The museum had closed for the evening, the last of the visitors filtering out into the crisp night air. The expansive marble atrium was completely silent, bathed in the soft, warm glow of the security lights. I walked slowly across the floor, my heels clicking gently against the stone until I reached the very center of the main exhibition hall. I stopped and stood in front of a towering illuminated glass display case. Inside rested my father's pristine decorated 4-star General Army uniform. The golden stars gleamed proudly on the shoulders. The rows of colorful military ribbons spoke of decades of unimaginable sacrifice, fierce resilience, and unwavering honor. I looked at the uniform, feeling my father's steady protective presence wrapping around me. When Julian and Beatrice broke into my home that rainy Tuesday morning, they assumed my wealth was measured by the square footage of my house, or the balance in a checking account. They thought power was something you projected through leased cars and loud, aggressive demands. They were entirely wrong. Looking at my father's stars, I understood the ultimate lesson he had left me. True wealth has absolutely nothing to do with high society status, luxury brands, or desperate social climbing. True wealth is possessing the absolute unshakable self-respect to know your own immense value. It is having the quiet, lethal discipline to hold your ground when enemies invade your sanctuary. And most importantly, true wealth is having the wisdom to step aside and simply let the trash take itself out. I did not destroy the Vance family. I merely handed them the rope, and they eagerly tied the knot themselves. They were so blinded by their own prejudice and insatiable greed that they could not see the cliff edge rapidly approaching until they were already falling into the abyss. I placed my hand flat against the cool glass of the display case, offering a silent, profound thank you to the man who taught me how to fight and win without ever throwing a single punch. I turned away from the uniform. I walked across the beautiful, sprawling museum I had built with my own hands and my own resources. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air of a city that now knew exactly who I was. I locked the doors behind me, leaving the past completely sealed away where it belonged. The streetlights illuminated the path ahead, bright and welcoming. I walked down the street, my head held high, my spirit utterly untouched, and for the first time in my entire life I was completely and flawlessly free. True wealth is never defined by societal status or the conditional approval of toxic family members. As this story shows, real power lies in self-respect, resilience, and the courage to walk away from those who attempt to diminish your value. The ultimate victory is not about seeking revenge, but about protecting your peace and establishing unbreakable boundaries against emotional and financial abuse. We cannot control how others treat us, but we absolutely control who gets access to our lives. Have you ever had to leave a toxic situation to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below, and please like and subscribe for more empowering content.